Chapter 403. In front of a valley about 20 li from Suzhou City, a manor without any special features was quietly waiting for dusk to descend. With the arrival of dusk, the night gradually fell. 400 black horses held coins in their mouths and cloths under their hooves as they quietly surrounded the manor like the grim reaper of the night. What followed was a bloody battle. The Black Knights outside the garden shot fire arrows into the garden, and the people inside were lighting their own fires. Smoke signals rose, lives were lost, and the garden was destroyed. The Black Knights were the 5th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. It was the most powerful department, but there was no one in the Yamen. They always waited outside Jingdou for Chun Pingping's transfer. It was not until later that the Overwatch Council gained a young commissioner that the Black Knights split into two. 1,000 followed Fan Xian. From this, one could see how much Chun Pingping valued Fan Xian. Last year, when Fan Xian went on a diplomatic mission to northern Qi, the Black Knights had escorted him all the way to the border. Furthermore, at Wudu, they had successfully annihilated the army that Shang Shanhu had sent to rescue Shaoan. The Black Knights who had been on standby in Jiangbei finally had a place to use their skills today. However, the deputy commander of the Black Knights, who was riding at the foot of the mountain, did not have any excited expression. To them, this was just a simple task. The commander of these 400 Black Knights was the deputy commander of the 5th Bureau, surnamed Jing Wuming. Jiang Jing sat steadily on his horse and looked at the raging fire in the garden. His right hand slowly pressed against his face and took off the black mask that covered his face, revealing a pale face and a pair of cold and emotionless eyes under the mask. The mission the commissioner had given them had been completed. However, they had not expected that this unremarkable garden would have such a powerful martial force that even the Black Knights had suffered some damage. The most terrifying thing was that everyone in the garden seemed to know that they had only one path to death. They fought with all their might. Not a single person surrendered. Jiang Jing did not know who was in the garden. He was only carrying out the commissioner's orders. Furthermore, the people in the garden had set fire themselves. Some evidence that could not see the light of day had probably long been destroyed. He grabbed the rope, and the horse's hooves clattered as it slowly approached the burning garden. The cavalrymen under him were treating the wounded and cleaning up the scene. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he watched all of this. Suddenly, his eyelids twitched. The 5 riders burst out of the fire, flickering with black flames, as if they were the ghost death cavalry of the netherworld. Other than the knights in black armor, there were also a few people who were tied up like rice dumplings. Jing Jing pressed his right hand on his face again and put on the black mask again before the 5 riders arrived. His thin lips slightly opened and a cold voice rang out. He was a little surprised and a little surprised alive. The 5 riders rode to his side and reported, "These 5 people are hiding in the well and have surrendered." Even though Jiang Jing was cold, there was an additional unexpected joy in his heart. The corners of his lips twitched and revealed a cold smile. The commissioner should be happy. With this garden's desperate resistance and the plan to burn indiscriminately, it was indeed not easy to capture them alive. Jiang Jing looked at the 5 captives tied up on the horse and felt a little strange in his heart. Back to Suzhou. The surface of the black mask reflected the golden flames. It looked extraordinarily colorful and had a chilling aura. Under the mask, Jiang Jing coldly gave the order. Outside the garden, the neighing of horses tore through the silence of the dark night in the valley. The horses' hooves clattered slightly before they formed up again. In unison, they became 3 black torrents and circled around the burning manor. They swept diagonally across the road at the foot of the mountain and disappeared into the night. Not long after the Black Knights left the mountain like ghosts and entered the plains, they ran into Deng Ziyu and his group, who had come to receive orders and receive the commissioner's latest order. Jiang Jing was silent for a moment and arranged for a small group of riders to escort the captives to Jingdou. The remaining hundreds of night death gods did not enter the city. Instead, they quietly found a place to cross the river and returned to the camp in Jiangbei. After Deng Ziyu reported back to Hua Garden, Fan Xian only nodded his head to indicate he understood. In his study, he finished writing a secret memorial to the emperor and handed it to a subordinate in the council to quickly send it back to Jingdou. Then, he went alone to the main hall of Hua Garden. Bright lanterns hung high in the main hall, illuminating it brightly. In particular, the chest of snowflake silver was lying quietly in the chest, reflecting an alluring light. Fan Xian glanced at the chest of silver and shook his head. Sighing, he sat on a chair beside the chest and thought to himself that silver was indeed very useful. 138,880 taels of silver were neatly stacked up in the chest. Fan Xian couldn't resist glancing at it again and sighed again. In the end, he gave up on the thought in his heart. Facing Yi Luyan, that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness actually made Fan Xian angry. Of course, he did not feel any unnecessary self-pity or humiliation. Not being able to defeat a great grandmaster was a matter of justice. However, he knew that no matter how his life developed in the future, there would come a day when he would face a great grandmaster. Even if it wasn't Yi Luyan, Sigu Jian, or that person in the palace, he would still have to face them head-on. However, Yi Luyan had cut the building in half with one strike and that powerful aura that filled the heaven and earth. It all made Fan Xian clearly realize that the current him was completely helpless against someone of the great grandmaster level. It was the same logic as the Ming family being completely helpless against him. A great grandmaster was too powerful, so powerful that he could ignore the encirclement of normal martial power. No wonder the emperor had always been lukewarm toward the Yi family. No wonder he was able to support that pair of orphans and widows. No wonder an idiot like Sigu Jian could protect Dongi. Fan Xian thought to himself and sighed. He began to miss his dear Uncle Wu Zhu. Immediately, he overturned his thoughts. He only had one life. He couldn't always rely on his uncle to resolve his worries and remove difficulties. Particularly, Wu Zhu couldn't have any advantage when facing these great grandmasters. From the depths of his heart, Fan Xian didn't want Uncle Wu Zhu to take risks. Then, how could he kill a great grandmaster? Under the company of a chest of silver and a hall full of lights, Fan Xian sank into deep thought. In an instant, he had already simulated many scenarios and themes in his mind. What kind of place of certain death and certain killing opportunity would he have to create in order to kill a great grandmaster on the spot? His palm unconsciously patted the chest. Suddenly, he stood up and yelled in a loud voice, "Meeting! Meeting!" As he yelled, he walked toward the back of the hall. The commissioner had called for a meeting, so no one dared to slight it. The upper-level officials the Overwatch Council had placed in Hua Garden, all of the members of the Qinian unit, and the 7 Tiger Guards all gathered in the conference hall. Fan Xian's but had just landed on the chair when he couldn't resist laughing and scolding. Help Sir Lin back to play. He glared at the third prince, who had come to watch the spectacle, and to Bao, who had run in at some point and had the serving girls help these two back. Glancing at the number of people present, he shook his head and said, "Invite Sir Chanli and Sang went over as well." The subordinate accepted the order and left. In a moment, Sir Chanli and Sang also arrived in the hall. Sir Chanli often helped his teacher handle some affairs, so he was not unfamiliar with this kind of meeting situation. On the contrary, Sang Wen's gentle face was filled with hesitation and shock. She thought the imperial envoy was discussing the important matters of court. What was she, a singer, doing here? The theme of today's meeting is very simple. Everyone, open your minds. If you have any strange ideas, be bold and say them. Fan Xian rubbed his temples and said with a headache, "I really can't think of anything by myself." Tiger Guard Gauda glanced at him and saw the commissioner's worry, but he didn't know what he was worried about. In a low voice, he said, "Sir, please give your orders." "Brainstorm, brainstorm, brainstorm." Fan Xian forced a smile and said, "Everyone, come and help come up with ideas." Everyone looked at him curiously, not knowing what ideas he wanted them to come up with. Fan Xian said very seriously, "What do you think it takes to kill a great grandmaster?" The discussion hall immediately became silent. All the subordinates looked at each other. Sangwon was so shocked that she pressed her slightly wide lips together into a small cherry mouth. Sure, Chanli had a strong urge to turn and leave. What was this discussion about? How could one kill a great grandmaster? If someone could actually think of a way, then the first thing the Qing Kingdom and Northern Shi would do was to send people to kill Sigejian according to the law. Then, the two countries would first divide the wealth of Dongyi with the noble women of the vassal states. Of all the people in the hall, Deng Ziyu's position was higher and he was closer to Fan Xian. Looking at his expression and the strange expressions of his colleagues, he carefully said, "Sir, were you injured by the sword, Qi?" Fan Xian immediately cursed angrily. "I didn't injure my brain." He didn't care how shocked his subordinates were. In any case, he forced everyone to come up with ideas. For a moment, the people in the discussion hall were forced into a corner. They could only pick some absurd ideas to come up with. As they came up with ideas, everyone felt uneasy. A great grandmaster was revered by tens of thousands of people. He was a godlike figure. Yet, they had to follow the commissioner's orders and think of how to harm him. However, the Overwatch Council was, in the end, a sinister yamen flowing with black water. After saying a few words, everyone let go of their courage and felt a strange sense of pleasure. Meeting to discuss how to kill a great grandmaster. Even if they couldn't kill him, just thinking about it was exciting enough. Someone opened the discussion by saying that they could not defeat a great grandmaster. If they wanted to defeat him, first of all, they had to weaken his power and increase their own. They suggested using poison. Someone immediately retorted that a great grandmaster's martial power had reached perfection. Once poison entered the body, it would immediately turn into a puddle of snow water and be useless. Someone suggested that they should choose a medicine that stimulated the body's inherent qualities. It was not an external poison, but it could move the body's emotions or energy in a short time. Naturally, it would weaken afterward. Fan Xian coldly interrupted. "That's an aphrodisiac." Someone else said that if one wanted to take a person's life, one had to first disturb their will. If one wanted to kill someone, one had to first make them crazy. They should construct some special scene to intensify the great grandmaster's emotions and make his mind sink into confusion. Fan Xian nodded with great approval. In his heart, he was cursing Ouyang Feng's craziness. Deng Ziyu thought for a while and suddenly slapped the table. In reality, it's not difficult. As long as we think of a way to set up a trap so that the opponent can't escape easily, we can use the 6th Bureau's crossbow camps to surround him and release them in order without stopping or resting. We can exhaust his true strength. Even if we have to use tens of thousands of crossbow arrows, we have to weaken the opponent's body and chi. Then, we can use the 5th Bureau's Black Knights to charge. After all, a great grandmaster is not a god. Fan Xian looked at him and asked, "How many people do you think will die with this plan of yours?" Deng Ziyu calculated and reported, "The 6th Bureau's crossbow camps will probably all be destroyed. There should still be 10% of the Black Knights alive." Fan Xian shook his head and said, "I want to kill people, not send my own people to their deaths." Deng Ziyu excitedly said, "If we can actually succeed, it doesn't matter how many people die." Fan Xian raised his brows and smiled coldly. "Then, how can you make the opponent not move and not escape? Just stand there and let you shoot and rush as you please?" "He's not a scarecrow." Deng Ziyu was silent. The brainstorming continued. The ideas everyone came up with became increasingly preposterous and nonsensical. Some people suggested becoming kidnappers, others suggested playing with an avalanche, and others suggested doing something to the latrine. Then, the rebuttals also arrived. First, Sigejian did not have any family. His family had all been killed by him. At the same time, Dongyi never saw snow all year round. As for the last suggestion, everyone snorted disdainfully and couldn't be bothered with it. Fan Xian watched this scene with cold eyes and felt slightly at ease. This seemingly preposterous discussion was actually to lessen the shock in his subordinates' hearts at the Baoyue brothel incident. Yi Liuyun's sudden appearance had, without question, created a powerful shadow in their hearts. Even Gao Da's face had difficulty showing its original determination. taking such a group of subordinates to do things, he couldn't allow them to be immersed in such inappropriate emotions. That was why Fan Xian would openly ask everyone to discuss how to kill a great grandmaster. After a few rounds of discussion, it was clear that the fear suppressed in the depths of everyone's hearts had lessened greatly. Other than excitement, it could be said that they had swept away the shock they had received during the day. The effect was good. Of course, the people in the discussion room did indeed bring up some effective methods. No one knew if Fan Xian would use them in the future. As for his subordinates taking Sigu Jian as their imaginary enemy, it was somewhat unexpected to Fan Xian. The people of the Qing Kingdom would never think of dealing with Yi Luyan, because they were in the honeymoon period with Northern Qi, because of Fan Xian's relationship with Haitang, and because the young lady of the Fan family had now become Master Ku, He's last disciple. The subordinates would not blindly discuss how to kill Ku He in front of the commissioner. It was that pitiful Sigu Jian again. The discussion lasted until the candles were extinguished. After everyone dispersed, they continued to whisper among themselves in the garden. They were excited by the commissioner's daring action and couldn't help themselves. Fan Xian shook his head and called Sang Wen over. Baiyue brothel is half destroyed. It will take at least half a month to repair. What arrangements have been made for the girls in the brothel? When they first went to evacuate the neighborhood, the guests in Baiyue brothel had all left. The girls had also been evacuated to a safe area. It was not until now that Fan Xian had the leisure to worry about his brothel business. Sang Wen replied respectfully and cautiously. The girls have been temporarily placed in other brothels. The bosses are very easy to talk to and have all taken them. However, staying in other brothels for a long time is not a good thing. Fan Xian nodded. In all of Suzhou, there was no one who didn't look at his face. Those brothel bosses were probably more than happy to help take in their own girls. Then, let Sure Chanli take the lead on the matter of recultivation. You can rest for a while. Fan Xian suddenly thought of something and raised his brows. A glimmer of ruthlessness appeared on his handsome face. Put away all of the detailed bills. When I return to the capital next year, I will find someone to collect on them. Sang Wen made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian asked, You don't have to live outside. Hua Garden is big. Spend a few days with Cici and help look after my brother-in-law. Sang Wen smiled innocently and covered her mouth, not saying anything. What is it? Miss Haidang also said the same thing, Sang Wen said with a light laugh. Those two girls have also been brought to the garden. Fan Xian was startled. Only now did he understand that she was talking about the two leading ladies of Baiyue brothel, Liang Dian and Ma So. He couldn't help but be surprised at Haitang's meticulousness. Liang Dian had not officially opened her cards, so it was indeed not appropriate for her to live in another brothel. As for Ma So, that was the great prince's mistress. He had to take good care of her. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 404. Taking Sang Wen with him into the back garden, Fan Xian raised his head to take a look. He saw the birds and swallows in the garden, green and red everywhere in harmony. It was the height of spring and approaching the height of summer. There was a cool breeze, and a crescent moon hung in the sky. There were lanterns hanging under the fake mountains and green trees. The moonlight and lantern light blended together and added a sense of haziness. In this hazy light, a dozen girls were chattering away. The girls with clear and gentle features were not wearing much clothing. They were either standing under the trees or lying on the couches. Their postures were all different. Occasionally, a bright light seeped through the muslin. The faint fragrance from their bodies wafted directly into his nose. Fan Xian was startled. He couldn't help but have a certain illusion. Had he come to the silken cave? When had the Hua Garden become the Chun Garden? The girls chattered endlessly. For a moment, they did not notice Fan Xian, who was standing with his back to the light. They were still enthusiastically talking about the Baiyue brothel incident during the day, the power of that one strike, and the imperial envoys scolding in the street. The main speaker was one of the two leading girls of the Baiwa brothel. The ones listening were the girls with wide eyes and expressions of curiosity or admiration. Fan Xian said in a low voice, "Didn't they say that the girls in the brothel were all sent to other places?" Sangwon covered her mouth and smiled. She explained, "Aren't these the girls in the garden?" Only now did Fan Xian come to his senses. He couldn't help but unconsciously glance at them a few more times. He sighed in his heart. It was said that girls changed 18 times between childhood and womanhood. How could these orphan refugee girls that Cece had picked up on the road have all grown so gorgeously after only a few days in Suzhou? Although there was still a childishness between their brows, and their inexperience had yet to fade, there was a natural aura of youth that pressed against his face. It made one feel very happy. In particular, the back garden had always prohibited men from entering. The maidservants were listening to Liang Dianyan's story during the day with great interest, so they were not particular about their manners. Some were lying on the couch with their buttocks sticking out, pretending to be arrogant and naive, while others were holding a fan and pretending to be virtuous. Their straight and slender legs, separated by a thin layer of cloth, presented all kinds of tight beauty. Big Brother's second nurse, Ma Soava, was sitting in a chair listening to the story. Although she had seen the situation from a distance during the day, hearing it from Liang Dianyan's sandalwood mouth made it even more shocking. However, Liang Dianyan had not personally seen the inside story of the brothel, so her description of Fan Xian, his defeat in the face of danger, and his extraordinary courage, was a bit exaggerated. She successfully created the image of a perfect young man that the kingdom of Qing should not have. The eyes of the girls in the garden all began to heat up and become bashful. They loved the imperial envoy to death, but they couldn't open their mouths. They didn't dare. Even Ma Suasoa tilted her head slightly to look in front of the pool. A strange expression appeared in her eyes. Fan Xian swallowed. He knew that if he continued to watch, he would make many mistakes in life. Those girls were still growing, but sister-in-law and Liang Dianyan were truly natural seductive creatures. Their eyebrows were like black, their lips like vermilion, and their eyes were full of spirit. If one looked at them and lost their spirit, how could one look again? He was just about to clear his throat to remind everyone when he heard a girl in the garden say something unintentionally. He closed his mouth and stood quietly with his back to the light. Sangwon glanced at him with confusion. She didn't know what had happened. The little girl was only 12 or 13. She opened her eyes wide and said innocently, "Sisters, why haven't we seen the mistress?" Because of the current situation, Fan Xian's group had lived in Hua Garden for a few months and hadn't moved to Hangzhou. During these days, Cece had brought these little girls to live in the garden. These girls had long known the name and identity of their benefactor. To be able to become the imperial envoy's servant girl made them feel very lucky. However, it had been so long, yet they hadn't seen the mistress. This made them feel a bit strange. Liang Dianyan listened to these words and paused slightly. She didn't say anything. These little girls didn't know. She was from Jingdou, so she knew about the explosive marriage between Fan and Lin. The young lady of the Lin family was the illegitimate daughter of the eldest princess. This matter had gradually changed from a secret known only to the nobility of the court to a rumor circulating among the people. Although it had not been proven, not many people didn't believe it. Everyone under heaven knew that Sir Fan Jr. and Xinyang had long become like fire and water. This matter, a girl spat and scolded, "What right do we have to discuss the matters of the master's family? If Cece hears it, be careful of your mouth." The girl in front of her laughed foolishly and said, "Hee hee. Actually, Shearer just wanted to see what kind of fairy-like appearance the mistress is worthy of the young master." In their hearts, Fan Xian was a top-notch figure. Naturally, they were curious about what kind of person Lin Wan'er was like. "I hear this mistress is also a virtuous young lady from a noble family." Liang Dianyan suddenly rolled her eyes and smiled sweetly. "However, I hear her appearance isn't all that outstanding. I'm afraid she can't even compare to Cece." "That's true. How many people can be worthy of the young master?" I really don't know in the future, right? Isn't there a girl living in our garden? It's just that we haven't seen her often. What a big attitude. Liang Diandian gave a not quite there smile and said, I hear she is also Sir's confidant. However, she's not Cece. She's an old man. She has no name or status. Shut up. The servant girl, who vaguely knew Haitan's identity, couldn't scold Liang Diandian. She could only grab the girl and quickly scold. You really want to die? How could such a noble person put on airs for you to see? Fan Xian couldn't listen to it anymore. He coughed and walked into the light. The servant girls jumped in fright and rose one after another. Restraining their spirits and breathing, they bowed in unison toward Fan Xian and said gently, Greetings, young master. The way they were addressed in Hua Garden was still according to the rules of the courtyards in Jingdou. Fan Xian looked at these girls and shook his head. He thought to himself that the discussion in his own garden was already like this. He didn't know how unbearable the rumors outside would be. However, he was also an open-minded person and couldn't be bothered to care about what other people silently criticized. Slowly, he said, It's late. Go to sleep. The servant girls stuck out their tongues and bowed again. They quickly tidied up their clothes and quietly returned to their own rooms. Only Liang Diandian and Ma Suasoa were called down by Fan Xian. Fan Xian stared at Liang Diandian's beautiful and naturally charming face and didn't speak for a moment. Liang Diandian was slightly happy, but she didn't show it on her face. On the contrary, she purposely appeared weak and timidly lowered her head, showing her most beautiful side. Back in the year of the marriage between Fan and Lin in Jingdou, according to the rumors in the marketplace, Fan Xian truly loved his sick wife dearly. From this, one could tell that Sir Fan Jr. valued relationships. In the boudoir, Fan Xian was the dream lover of all the girls. Although Liang Diandian had grown up on a pleasure boat, she was no exception. However, she had some uncomforting scheming and considerations. Liang Diandian was very confident in her appearance. She thought to herself that the young mistress was not as beautiful as her, yet she was able to receive Sir Fan Jr.'s love. This man probably liked to take pity on others and had purposely put on such an appearance. Furthermore, after the Suzhou branch of Baiwa brothel had opened, Sir Fan Jr. had not allowed her to receive guests. Presumably, he was also interested in her. Feeling Fan Xian's unmoving gaze, Liang Diandian's happiness gradually grew. She lowered her head shyly and didn't say a word. Standing behind Fan Xian, Sangwen watched this scene. A disgusted smile rose to the corners of her lips. Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth and said, Everyone has the right to live better, so I don't dislike your way of thinking. Liang Diandian raised her head in shock and met Fan Xian's emotionless gaze. Only now did she know she had misunderstood. Her heart jumped. Fan Xian continued coldly, However, I don't like it. Liang Diandian was overwhelmed with shame and didn't dare to say anything. No one is born to serve others. If you don't want to work in Baiwa brothel, have shopkeeper Sang turn you into a Qing household. Once you've earned back the silver, you will be allowed to leave. Fan Xian stared at her beautiful face and said, Sangwen, pack her luggage and find another place to live. Sangwen was startled. She had not expected the commissioner to be so heartless. However, she didn't say anything. She brought Liang Diandian, whose eyes were glistening with tears, into the manor to pack. At this moment, there was only Fan Xian and Ma Suasoa left in the garden. Ma Suasoa suddenly opened her mouth and said in a quiet voice, Sir, is Suasoa also going out of the manor to avoid polluting the peace of this garden? The corners of Fan Xian's mouth twitched slightly, and he laughed bitterly. Looking at the Hu tribe princess's eyes that were like the blue sea, her straight nose, and her deep and beautiful face, he quietly said, Stay here. Don't talk too much. Don't ask too much. I like you very much. If there's a chance in the future, I will help you. Ma Suasoa was slightly surprised and raised her head to look at Fan Xian. It was as if she hadn't thought that he would see everything so clearly and reveal such intentions. She couldn't help but gratefully say, Thank you, sir. Fan Xian calmly said, No need to thank me. I have always liked to stand on ice and see the world. Returning to the room, Cece had already prepared hot water. After washing his face, he dipped his feet into the hot water. Fan Xian sighed with satisfaction and immediately closed his eyes. He began to follow the method Hai Dang had taught him, using small drops to repair the meridians that had been injured by Yi Liuyun's sword qi. Ever since he was young, his method of cultivation was different from that of others. The proper process of meditation was as easy as napping for him. After an indeterminable amount of time, his eyelids opened slightly and Jinqi circulated through his entire body. He found that he was already much more comfortable. He also found that the room was quiet and couldn't help feeling a little strange. Looking to the side, he found that Cece had already fallen asleep on the desk. It was probably because she had been worried for too long during the day and waited for too long at night that the girl was unbearably sleepy. Fan Xian smiled and didn't wake her up. He grabbed a towel and wiped the water off his feet. Gently, he walked behind her and placed his robe on her body, worried that she would catch a cold. He stood behind Cece for a while and looked at the strands of messy hair at the back of the girl's spotlessly white neck. He couldn't help but sigh. He thought of the time when he and Cece were copying books in Danzhou. How relaxed, happy, and free it was. There were no outside matters to worry about. There was only a bean lantern, an inkstone, a bald brush, and a delicate attendant. The two of them sat side by side, copying the story of the stone. Although they didn't have any glyphs, those dots of graceful handwriting were truly fragrant. He thought for a bit, and then gently pressed his right hand against the back of Cece's neck and helped her rub it. He applied some Jinqi to a few acupuncture points to help her adjust her breathing and sleep. Only then did he carefully lift her up and put her on the bed. Pulling the thin blanket over her, he finally felt reassured and patted her face. He then picked up his shoes and walked out of the room. The moment he closed the door, he seemed to see the soundly sleeping Cece. A safe and satisfied smile appeared on his face. Wearing a robe, pulling on his shoes, and shrugging his shoulders, Fan Xian strolled through Hua Garden without a care for his image. It was as if he wanted to borrow the night breeze to blow away the depression in the depths of his heart. Although the Hua Garden that the salt merchant Yang Jimei had given him was beautiful, it was a pity that it could not calm his heart. There were too many things weighing down on his heart. Uncle Wu Zhu was not by his side, and was not by his side. He truly had no place to complain, no place to discuss, and no place to vent. No one knew why he had done things in such a hurry in Jiangnan, and why he did not care about anything in order to turn things around, including his friends, his subordinates, his enemies, and his family. Everyone seemed to have an erroneous judgment toward Fan Xian. This kind of judgment was what made Fan Xian most angry. Everyone thought that Fan Xian could be ruthless when it came to the struggle for power. Thus, intentionally or unintentionally, everyone had forgotten the countless threads of connection between him and the eldest princess. They only waited to see how he would stomp Xinyang into the ground. They had not thought that not only would Fan Xian stomp, but he would stomp beautifully. Fan Xian did not have a shred of affection for the eldest princess, but his affection for Wan was deeply rooted. After all, what was the eldest princess' own daughter? Everyone had forgotten this point. Everyone had purposely forgotten this point. Fan Xian was very angry and gloomy. Although he had already secretly made arrangements, he was still angry. If one day the eldest princess truly died at his hands, what would happen to Wan? Nowhere to complain, nowhere to complain. Fan Xian could not stop his steps. It was like this in officialdom in Jianghu, and it was also like this in Hua Garden. He strode around the quiet pond and walked through the long and desolate corridor. Purely subconsciously, he followed that familiar stone path and walked to the quiet study at the back of Hua Garden. He raised his head to look at the door and couldn't resist smiling self-mockingly. How had he come here again? Ensure Shua Xinu. Wang Xinji lived in Shanin. Because he missed Priest Dian, he braved the snow and took a boat through the night to visit. As the morning light shone brightly, the king arrived in front of the Dai family's door. Without knocking, he turned and left. The servant put down the large chair. The king said, I came in high spirits and left when my spirits are exhausted. Why should I see Diane? Fan Xian did not have this kind of awkward scholarly bearing. He also did not like to play tacit. He was even more ashamed of teacher Su and Fan Xian's affectation. Since he had come, he knew that he was already used to coming to find her to discuss things when he faced true difficulties in his state of mind. He wanted to find a way, at least a way to calm his heart. Thus, he walked up the stone steps and gently pushed the door under the moon. The study was not bolted. During this half year, she had lived there, quietly, alone in a secluded part of Hua Garden. Haidang had long woken up when he arrived at the door. She had already sat up on the bed. She wore a flowery robe and sat at the head of the bed, looking at him with a not-quite-there smile. There was no light in the study. Only the faint moonlight from outside seeped in. Given their realms, they could clearly see everything in the room and the expression on each other's faces. The night was a bit cold. Fan Xian rubbed his hands and turned to close the door. He tugged on his shoes and walked to the side of Haitong's bed. Without a trace of politeness, he lifted a corner of the brocade quilt and burrowed in. Sitting on the other side of the bed, he looked at Haidang across the bed. The quilt was very warm. There was no fragrance. There was only a clean and warm feeling. Haitang looked at this scoundrel and helplessly said, You have to know that I have thought about it. I am still going to marry in the future. Fan Xian's feet rubbed against the cotton cloth on the bed and sighed comfortably. He was also surprised and disappointed that he hadn't touched Haitong's feet. It looked like the girl across from him was sitting cross-legged. He said, I am the adulterer. He then smiled and said, You are the whore. Of course, he said with a smile. This is what people say. Haitang glared at him. Fan Xian said, There is only one thing that I will not be satisfied with even if I die. Although I am born a bit better than others, I do not have the intention to seduce you. What? How can you insist that we have an affair? Duo, I cannot accept this. Today, I have already tarnished my reputation. It is not that I say a word of regret. In any case, it is like this. Why don't we have another reason? These words were said with hidden bitterness. Haitang only sighed. Although this section wasn't printed, Cece copied it 2 days ago and showed it to me. Why do you have to use the same words Qingwen said in the 77th verse to ridicule me? I am not second master Bao, and you are not a pretty servant girl. Yi Luyin has not hurt you to the point of death. You are pretending to be resentful, but who knows what you are angry about in your heart? Fan Xian shook his head with a self-mocking smile and didn't speak for a moment. The study that had been converted into a bedroom sank into silence. I don't like to play around, Fan Xian said quietly. Fan Xian said quietly, You probably don't understand what I mean, but I really do like to stay with you and talk. Haitong's bright eyes glowed in the dark night. But right now, we are indeed very intimate, Fan Xian said with a slight smile. I had originally wanted to pour out the bitterness in my heart, but I didn't expect that I would suddenly have a thought and find another bitter matter. Everyone will marry someone. Fan Xian half leaned against the foot of the bed and closed his eyes slightly. But why is it that when I think of you marrying someone else in the future, my heart is so unhappy? The smile in Haitong's eyes gradually became more and more like the moon in the water, and the strands of moon in the water gradually leaking out of the bamboo basket. Her hands gently pulled at the corner of the blanket and covered her chest. Looking at Fan Xian's face, she slowly said, Then, how about marrying you? I had a lot of fun writing this chapter. Min, I would like to thank Sean for the youthful video that you provided. It is the last day of the month. As usual, I ask for monthly votes. Rules. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 405. Haidong's words made Fan Xian feel very good and powerful. At this moment, this young man and woman were sharing a large blanket. Under the moonlit night, they were quietly talking about such moving matters. It was inevitable that they would descend into a very violent and cliché ending. However, Fan Xian was not surprised. He did not crawl under the bed in fright or turn into a wolf and pounce. He only said sincerely, seriously, and straightforwardly, "Very good. Let's discuss the wedding date." This sentence was in response to the "How about marrying you?" Thus, it was Haitong's turn to be stunned. She felt as if she had spun a cocoon and was caught in it. She knew that she had once again underestimated the shamelessness and blackness under Fan Xian's gentle appearance. She chuckled and lowered her head. She was also muttering in her heart. Why did such a sentence pop up? During this year, she and Fan Xian had often interacted. The two of them had long developed a sense of closeness and tacit understanding that went beyond friendship through familiarity. It was close to family. Fan Xian looked at her expression and knew what she was thinking. Raising his brows, he smiled and said, "Your Empress Dowager, your Emperor." Haitang raised her face and continued with a smile. "Your Baldy," Fan Xian continued with a serious expression. Haitang tilted her head slightly. "Your identity, and your identity," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. These few sentences without a head or tail had already clearly laid out the obstacles and problems that lay between the two of them. When a man and a woman interacted, it was important to be of one heart. Although the two of them did not say sweet words of love, with the moonlight as proof, they could see through each other's thoughts. There were countless mediocre people in the world of mortals. It was rare to find a confidant who would easily pass it up and let it go. The problem was, the Qing Emperor certainly did not want Fan Xian to have such a powerful foreign aid from Northern Qi's Tianyi Dao while he had such great power. Furthermore, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager had been urgently searching for a young and handsome man of equal status for Haitang this year. She could not let Haitang handle it herself. Fan Xian and Haitang's status in their respective countries meant that if the two of them broke out of their current situation and openly stood shoulder to shoulder, they would face unimaginable pressure. The Qing kingdom side was easier to handle. Even if the Qing emperor did not like Fan Xian receiving foreign aid, given the emperor's powerful self-confidence, he would inevitably think of using Fan Xian's situation to further weaken Northern Qi's power. Fan Xian could use this reason to convince his father, who he was not very close to. In the eyes of the Qing people, Fan Xian marrying Haitang was a joyous matter that brought face to the Qing people. Who wouldn't want to take advantage of something? The resistance from Northern Qi must be great. Regardless of whether or not Northern Qi's self-proclaimed orthodox subject could accept it, the pride of their country, Saintess Haitang, a Tianmai warrior, being married to the southern barbarians they despised deep down, including the Empress Dowager and Ku He, would all prevent this from happening. The two sides could discuss the exchange of students, but the Northern Qi people were clearly at a disadvantage when it came to marrying off girls. How could they be willing to do that? As for the little emperor, even Fan Xian admired his methods and didn't have any extravagant hopes that he would let go. Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and said, "You came to Jiangnan because your little emperor asked you to supervise me making money. If you become my family's fated old woman, we could be considered a husband and wife shop, spending his money however we want. Wouldn't he be angry to death?" Haitang smiled and said, "If he heard your words, he would be angry to death." Fan Xian sighed and said, "Actually, if you marry me and our whole family go to a secluded place to spend the rest of our lives, it would work. Who cares how angry the courts of the two countries will be?" Haitang gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. "Are you willing?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment and gazed back at her, unwilling to show weakness. "Are you willing?" The two of them met each other's eyes and knew that they both had ties in their hearts. They both had a sliver of kindness toward the world. Although Fan Xian's kindness came from his selfish heart and Haitang's came from her kind nature, no matter who it was, they could not leave lightly and coldly watch everything that happened in the world from beyond the clouds. They were all people who had entered the world. How could they be unworldly? The room once again fell silent. In the night sky above Hua Garden, the crescent moon suddenly pierced through the smoke-like clouds. Its light increased slightly and reflected off the walls and ponds in the garden and into the room. It covered the large bed, the brocade quilt, and the two wonderful people with a layer of light. Haitang looked at him calmly and suddenly smiled slightly. What is important is that you already have a wife. Fan Xian fell silent. He knew these words were not easy to respond to. He had been reborn into this world for almost 20 years, yet he had never heard of the custom of taking two wives. Although he had once talked to Uncle Wu Zhu about the three representatives and the three main purposes on the cliff, one of which was to marry many, many wives when things came to a head, he found that to be a Dumas with all the beauties alone was, in reality, very difficult. What was important was that his standards were too high. He sighed shamelessly. There was no need to talk about Wanner. She was the most favored princess in the palace. In front of him, Haitang, who could no longer bear to let go, had an incomparably lofty position in northern Qi. Earlier, he had already laid out so many obstacles. What if he let Haitang enter as a concubine? Fan Xian shivered. Even he felt that this matter was somewhat ironic. Furthermore, he believed that the northern Qi people would certainly go crazy. Perhaps the two countries would go to war again. Are you cold? Haitang looked at him with a smile. Her hands pulled at the bedding and carefully covered her shoulders. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and sighed. My heart is cold. The night was indeed a bit cold. The large quilt was sleeping together, but it could not cover the two of them. Haitang pulled a little, and Fan Xian's upper body was empty outside. He shivered slightly and pulled it back. With a swish, Haitang was startled. She found that the quilt had been snatched away by him. She glared angrily at him and snatched it back. Fan Xian chuckled and didn't say anything. He snatched it back. The two of them played the childish game of snatching the quilt on the bed. Fortunately, neither of them used Jinshi. Otherwise, how could the quilt be condemned to death? It would have long become thousands of cotton wads dancing in the night wind, torn apart and perished. But how could the quilt be so lucky? It could actually be fought over by the two most famous and powerful people of the younger generation, not giving an inch of land. The quilt was not a jade seal. If these two people followed the original course of history, perhaps many years later, they would be standing in each other's countries and fighting for the world. But now that they had begun to fight for the quilt, the world should not fight anymore. Heaven blessed the people of the world. It was rare for them to have such a wild quarrel. The two of them closed their mouths tightly and glared at each other. Haitang's legs, which had been crossed, also came down. She kicked with embarrassment and anger. Thus, the lecher Fan Xian seized the opportunity. Fan Xian let go, and the large quilt was immediately snatched away by Haitang. With a whoosh, the curtains were rolled up, burying Haitang's upper body in the soft bedding. The girl let out a surprised cry. A pair of legs wearing thin panties were exposed outside the quilt. Particularly the pair of bare feet. They were pure white and tempting. Fan Xian stretched out his hand and covered this pair of feet. Haitang's feet trembled slightly, but she did not struggle. Don't catch a cold, Fan Xian said righteously. He was actually very proud in his heart. His grab earlier had indeed reached his highest realm. It was as fast as lightning, as fast as a gust of wind. Once the sunflower came out, it faintly had some of the realm of the blind uncle hitting people with a bamboo stick. How could Haitang dodge it? Perhaps. Haitang did not even want to dodge. The touch was not bad. Fan Xian held the girl's feet in his arms and narrowed his eyes proudly. For some reason, his mind thought of his previous life. When he was in high school, it snowed heavily and he held the female class monitor's feet in his arms like this. Oh, only when he was happy would he remember those things that were already so far away that they were almost blurry. Let go. Buried in the quilt, Haitang spoke in a humming voice. However, there was an additional glimmer of anger in her tone. Fan Xian hesitantly let go. It completely went against the perseverance a man should have at this time. Haitang flipped the quilt off and looked at him angrily. However, her face was slightly red, and her hair was messy. It looked very threatening. Fan Xian watched as she pulled her feet back into the quilt. He chuckled and didn't say anything. A slight blush appeared on Haitang's face. She glared at him and then turned toward the inside of the bed. Fan Xian quietly transformed into a black cat and crawled over. He lay next to her, but he lay very orderly. In a voice as thin as a mosquito's, he said, "It's cold. Give me a blanket. Haidang used a bee-like voice to buzz. You don't have your own hands? Although she said this, the girl still moved a little further in to give Fan Xian some space. At the same time, she left half of the quilt for him. Fan Xian lay down comfortably and sniffed hard. He found that he indeed didn't smell any body fragrance. There was only a peaceful, clean, and gentle feeling enveloping him. He opened a pair of bright eyes and looked at the ceiling of the tent in the dark night. The two of them lay on the same bed. Silence was awkwardness, and awkwardness was warmth. Earlier, Fan Xian had said he didn't play around with warmth, but in reality, he loved this feeling. He thought to himself, Duo has finally revealed her childish side today. It is very interesting, very interesting. He completely did not realize that his heart had a strange fetish. Haidang calmed down slightly. She carefully revealed her face and said, You really don't want me to marry? Yes. Fan Xian put his hands behind his head and smiled slightly. Even if you want to marry, you can't marry someone else. It can only be me. Haidang lost. I came here today to pour out my troubles to you. Fan Xian glanced at the girl beside him and told her of his earlier worry in the garden. Haidang thought for a bit and then quietly said, Isn't it inappropriate to tell me about the matter between you and your wife at this time? Fan Xian was startled. Only then did he realize that he seemed to have been a bit of a bastard. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, Fine, let's talk about Yi Luyan. I still don't understand why he would come to Suzhou and show himself. Once they got down to business, Haitang's childish side suddenly disappeared. She recovered her usual calm and stability. Turning around, she began to discuss and analyze with Fan Xian. At the same time, she told him about following Yi Luyan from afar along the way, as well as the story of what happened along the way. The two of them talked back and forth, but still couldn't come to a conclusion. It was Haitang who suddenly said lightly, There is one possibility. I wonder if you've thought about it. What is it? Fan Xian asked curiously. Perhaps the emperor had long known of the Yi family's connection to the Juanshan conference, so Yi Luyan was not worried about the emperor knowing he had acted. Haitang said seriously. Fan Xian thought for a while and then shook his head. It still doesn't make sense. After talking about Yi Luyan, what did they talk about? The old manor in Jingdou. Lin Wan? Naturally, this was a question that was not convenient to talk about in bed. Fan Xian would more or less feel guilty. No matter how open Haitang's heart was, she was not an ignorant and senseless wooden person. Lying like this, their breaths intertwined, their body heat invaded, and their occasional contact, although it was not truly ecstatic, it still made the temperature in the blankets slowly rise. Let's talk about the temple, Fan Xian said lightly, perhaps having made up his mind. A glimmer of gentleness and emotion flashed through Haitang's eyes. She smiled slightly and said, By Westlake and Hangzhou, you said you only talked about worldly affairs. The temple is my business, Fan Xian smiled and said. In the future, it is also your business. For some reason, the warmth and trust in these words warmed Haitang. Even if she was the northern Qi saint girl, able to enter and leave the palace without any hindrance, and had an outstanding status, where would she go to find a confidant, a true friend, someone who could treat her as an equal and treat her without any ill feelings? Wu? Haitang got up slightly and gestured in the air with her finger. One up, one down, one up, one down. She drew a few semicircles. Her brows were furrowed tightly. Then what does the symbol on the temple mean? Fan Xian had already described in detail what Shaoan had told her in the cave. Only, out of consideration for the girl's feelings, he hid the matter of Master Ku eating human flesh. Haitang listened quietly the entire time. When she recounted Shaoan's past in Northern Wei, a complicated emotion occasionally flashed through her eyes. In the end, she was puzzled by those symbols, so she opened her mouth to ask. How would I know? Fan Xian said with a headache. It looks like one day I will have to go to the temple to take a look. Determination gradually appeared in Haitang's bright, limpid eyes. I want to go. Fan Xian smiled. I know how tempting this is for you, so you have to promise me. You can't sneak off by yourself. He pointed at his head and said, Shaoan's route back in the day was hidden here. Who was the girl who ran out of the temple? Haidang asked. In reality, she had already faintly guessed. Although the answer did not surprise her, it still made her sigh uncontrollably. My mother. Fan Xian spoke very proudly. Thus, the conversation began to turn back to the Yi family. Occasionally, they would talk about the blind uncle's elegance. The more she listened to the details, the stronger the longing in Haitong's eyes became. Back then, what kind of era was that? The girl sighed. The 4 great grandmasters all appeared in that era. Other than that, there were your mother and the blind uncle, 2 dazzling figures. Fan Xian joked, in a few days, you'll have to call me Granny. Haiding couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. She sighed to herself. Coming out of the temple, could it be? Her eyes lit up. Miss, you should be a tea on my being? What is a tea on my being? Fan Xian laughed coldly. Naturally, he wouldn't tell her the wondrous story of transmigration. Everyone under heaven says you are a tea on my being. What do you think? Haitang smiled. Teachers said that those who can receive the will of heaven and be chosen by the temple are tea on my beings. I don't know why teacher calls me that. According to this saying, isn't Ku he a tea on my being? The martial methods of your Channy Dao were truly stolen by my mother from the temple. They were stolen. They weren't taught by the immortals of the temple. This is a matter of scholars. Stealing books? How can it be stealing? Could Missy have a special bloodline? Haidang suddenly became interested. Her bright eyes stared at Fan Xian's face. Your meridians are completely different from those of ordinary people. Otherwise, you would not be able to practice such strange and tyrannical martial methods. This must have something to do with your mother's past. Fan Xian looked at the girl's expression and knew what she was thinking. He smiled coldly and said, Are you thinking that my future child might also be a strange one? Haiding smiled faintly and didn't reply. Don't think about things like borrowing seeds. Fan Xian didn't know if it was because he thought of his romantic birth, but his anger flared. He lowered his voice and roared, And don't think about putting aphrodisiacs in a wine. Haiding looked at his angry expression and only smiled and didn't say anything. See, Lily isn't pregnant. Fan Xian thought of that matter, and a bellyful of fire gradually grew. The bodies of the 2 people under the blanket were already hot like fire. Now that the evil fire had been provoked, how could it not ignite the fire of desire? Fan Xian gritted his teeth and pressed his face together. He didn't care if Duo would easily kill him with a flip of her hand. He pulled her into his arms and held her. Holding her from behind, he felt the girl's slightly hot and trembling body in front of him. Fan Xian said by her ear, If you're truly interested, you don't need to use aphrodisiacs. I'm also willing to give myself to you. Haiding laughed coldly and didn't turn her head. She lightly said, Other than using your hands and feet, do you not have any other ability to make me admire you? Fan Xian said angrily, I only used my feet earlier. When did I use my hands? Haidang seemed to have thought of something. Her voice suddenly softened. A moment later, she quietly said, On the official road out of the palace treasury. Fan Xian immediately remembered that day beside the spring woods. He had calmly held the girl's hand in his arms and refused to let go no matter what. The style of a man and a woman cared about one attacking and one defending, and turning defense into offense. However, Fan Xian and Haidang had been since last spring. He had written a poem in his mind and then used the special aphrodisiac move. In addition to the many subsequent encounters and clever changes, he had long moved from a battle of wits and strength to a battle of hearts and, finally, a battle of emotions. The relationship between the 2 of them had changed. Their emotions had changed. Their methods had also changed. Now, what was the point of fighting? Was fighting with others truly endlessly joyful? Fan Xian actually didn't like it, so his hand passed under Duoduo's armpit and reached forward. Holding her hands, he contentedly rubbed his face against the back of her neck. Haidang only felt her face grow increasingly hot. This damned little rascal behind her was clearly someone with a wife, yet he kept on teasing her. It was truly despicable. But why was it that in this half a year, her heart had gradually become chaotic. The clear and natural state of mind of the past had long been lost. Why was this? She faintly sighed and said for the third time that night, "You really don't want me to marry." Fan Xian said vaguely, "You have to marry me and bring your sister. It's a pity you don't. You truly are shameless." For some reason, Haitang suddenly felt embarrassed and angry. She gently bit her lip as she spoke. Fan Xian quietly said, "There's nothing I can do. If I don't ruin your reputation and sleep with you for a night, your wife is going to marry you tomorrow. I have no other choice." Haitang lost again. "Today you've said so many secrets, even the secrets of the temple. Aren't you afraid I'm using a honey trap?" Haitang suddenly said with a smile. Fan Xian seriously said, Duo, you're not a great beauty." The next morning, Fan Xian pushed open the door and walked out. The morning light was bright, and the cool breeze was very comfortable. He couldn't help but stretch. Ah! A serving girl's scream came from the garden. The serving girl immediately closed her mouth. Everyone knew that the imperial envoy and Haitang in the back of the garden had a private relationship, but the two of them had always maintained their politeness in front of everyone. There was not a trace of it. Who would have thought that Sir Fan Jr. would so openly walk out of the girl's boudoir? Walking out of the boudoir early in the morning, what did this mean? Fan Xian smiled slightly and gazed at the serving girl and warmly said, "Morning." He then walked to the front garden. Along the way, he saw the serving girls and subordinates and warmly said, "Morning." For a moment, the people in the garden did not understand. They thought, when did Sir Fan become so cultured and refined? How could his mood be so good that it made one's hair stand on end? Immediately, the shocking news gradually spread through the mouths of the servants throughout Hua Garden. Immediately after, it reached the ears of Fan Xian's subordinates. Cece's mouth was wide open as she listened to the news. Although she knew it would happen sooner or later, she still felt it was a bit sudden. In particular, she suddenly felt that the letter in her hand had become somewhat heavy. Last night, she had slept deeply and had forgotten to give this letter to the young master. She was the head serving girl of the old Danzhou manor. All her thoughts were on Fan Xian. She quickly asked the serving girl, "Where's the young master right now?" "In the front hall?" By the time Fan Xian had tidied up and was sitting in the front hall preparing to discuss matters, a few members of the Qinian unit, including Deng Ziyu, as well as Gouda and the 7 Tiger Guards, already knew the biggest news of the day in Hua Garden. The strong and powerful warriors looked at Fan Xian with respect on their faces. To be able to eat the northern Qi Saint girl, not only did it require courage, it also required great martial arts. Deng Ziyu was the only one with a worried expression. He was highly regarded in the old manor in Jingdou, and Lin Wan'er was very good at managing her subordinates. She never hesitated to reward Fan Xian's personal guards. Furthermore, her personality was close and likable, so she was greatly respected and loved by the servants in the old manor. He suddenly felt that the situation was not good. Who would be the mistress of the Fan family in the future? He, as well as all the servants, stood on the side of the mistress. However, he couldn't help but think with a chill in his heart, if there was conflict in the Fan family in the future, how could the mistress defeat Haitang? Fan Xian didn't know what his trusted aide was thinking. He only continued to drink the porridge. In reality, the main reason last night was because talking with Haitang was too exhausting. He also had to make arrangements for Yi Liuyun's mysterious appearance and analyze the situation between the two countries. Naturally, he was tired. However, if he said this, no one would believe him. Discussing national affairs under the covers? Forget it. At this time, Cece finally rushed to the front hall and handed over the letter in her hand. Fan Xian looked at the handwriting on the letter and paused. When he tore open the letter and read, his mouth immediately opened slightly. The porridge almost flowed out. He thought to himself that this old woman was shameless and lowly for eating porridge. He was indeed a bit shameless and lowly, but he wasn't ready yet. Was he going to be tortured? He stood up and gazed at Deng Ziyu. With a long sigh, he said, "Find a few people to go to Shazhou. They have to be capable and meticulous." Deng Ziyu said strangely. The Suzhou matter is not settled yet. Fan Xian said with a pained expression. Go pick someone up. Pick who up? Your mistress. Warner was coming. Fan Xian was happy. However, the number of happy things had suddenly increased. It seemed to be a bit troublesome. My fellow countrymen, I know I was wrong. Today is only the last day of the month. I have indeed been muddle-headed. However, very good. On the last day, I'll ask for monthly votes. I'll work hard to get monthly votes. Although the fourth and fifth votes are all the same, it doesn't stop me from looking good. Today's chapter is about romance, but there's a hidden meaning within. I have to be careful. At the end of the month, everyone is relaxing. Also, don't talk about stud horses. Who says I'm not a stud horse? My novel is a stud horse novel. Didn't the introduction say that when I write novels, I am indeed a very stubborn person? I will only continue to write in the direction I should write. That's all. Please understand, my dream is to become Dumas and earn big money. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 406. Warner had not yet arrived, but the people Fan Xian had sent out in Suzhou began to come back one by one. They had scattered Fan Xian's sinister seeds throughout Jiangnan and brought back the good news Fan Xian needed. The first to return was Xia Qifei. Fan Xian did not meet him in Hua Garden because Baiwa Brothel was half-ruined, so it was impossible to meet him there. In the end, he chose to go to Xia Ming's manor in the south of the city in the middle of the night. Fan Xian had paid for this garden. However, after he had come once with the third prince, he had never come again. The travel-worn Xia Qifei looked at Fan Xian, who was walking up the steps under the protection of the tiger guards, and jumped in fright. He had planned to go to Hua Garden in the afternoon, but had been told to wait in the manor. He had not expected the commissioner to personally come. Respectfully welcoming Fan Xian into the study, these two illegitimate children did not exchange too many pleasantries. Fan Xian did not have the patience to express the warmth of a superior, so he directly entered the topic. Through Xia Qifei's report, Fan Xian's heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally relaxed. Ever since Xia Qifei had accepted the palace treasury's major bids, he had, with the help of the Overwatch Council, mobilized the Jianghu brothers of the Jiangnan Water Bandits and began to move toward the right path. However, they were, after all, Jianghu people. Fan Xian was always worried that the seventh Ming disciple would not be able to handle matters properly. Only tonight did he truly relax. It looked like Xia Qifei had indeed inherited some of the old Ming master's talent. He did not neglect the necessary skills of buying goods, bills of lading, opening roads, and bribing officials. What made Fan Xian feel most at ease was that after Xia Ming's merchant group passed through Jiangbei, they made contact with the northern Qi people in a small town to the south of Sangzhou. On the northern Qi side, the little emperor had arranged for Changningho's son, Wei Hua, to be the head of the brocade guard. Of course, there would not be any problems with the safety of the goods. However, Fan Xian was curious as to who had personally entered deep into the Qin kingdom and taken the risk to receive the first batch of goods. It was the commander himself. Xia Qifei himself seemed to be shocked at the meeting at the time. Fan Xian was also startled. He couldn't help but have a different opinion of Wei Hua. He held a high position, yet he dared to enter the Qin kingdom. He couldn't help but feel great disdain for the defensive power in the Sangzhou area. The Northern Qi Brocade Guard was only responsible for the safety of the road to the north. In the past, it had been the Northern Qi Empress Dowager and the eldest princess who had made the deal. After doing it for so many years, they were already familiar with it. Now, it was the little emperor and Fan Xian making the deal. This was their first deal, so they had to be careful. What about our people in the north? He suddenly asked with a frown. Xia Qifei carefully looked at him and took out a letter from his bosom. This is a letter that Lord Wang asked this lowly official to bring back. He also brought a gift to the south. Fan Xian accepted the letter and saw that it was indeed Wang Qinyan's unique handwriting. He didn't take the long box that Xia Qifei handed over and indicated for him to put it to the side. Shaking his head, he asked, "Wang Qinian is more afraid of death than I am." Of course, he wouldn't foolishly head south. However, we have to have someone follow. Which merchant company is taking over the north? In reality, he knew that the Chui family's routes in the north had all been privately taken over by him. The Qing court had always thought that the northern Qi emperor controlled them. Only a few people in the Fan manor, the Yin family, and a few of Fan Xian's trusted aides knew about the matter of the second Fan prince privately controlling the northern smuggling routes. The Qing emperor only knew that the second Fan prince was in the north. He had not expected Fan Xian to have his young brother manage such a major matter. Fan Xian did not plan on telling this to Xia Qifei, so he only asked casually. He wanted to use Xia Qifei's mouth to find out how his brother was doing in the north. Unfortunately, at the time, Xia Qifei's attention was all on the extremely daring commander of the Brocade Guard and did not pay much attention to the merchant companies in the north. However, he had faintly heard some rumors. He heard that the merchant in the north responsible for handling the palace treasury's smuggled goods was ruthlessly mysterious. Normal people didn't even know if the boss was a man or a woman. Fan Xian smiled. A glimmer of relief rose to his eyes. It looked like Xia had finally learned to be low-key and endure. However, Haidang was in Jiangnan. Only he and Wang Qinian were in the north. It was not convenient for the spy system of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to handle too many things for him. The Northern Qi Emperor would not make things difficult for him for his sake. However, for a young man to be in such a dangerous situation, it was truly hard on him. However, Fan Xian did not plan on sending people to help him. His experience of being reborn clearly told him that as long as it was cold, it would emerge through grinding. Xia had a talent for business. If it did not undergo such difficult and complicated grinding, it would truly be a pity. After chatting a bit more with Xia Qifei, Fan Xian admired the head of the Jiangnan water bandits in front of him more and more. Now, he was his subordinate. It looked like subduing this person in Shazhou was indeed very beneficial to his Jiangnan plan. Everything will be done according to the established plan, Fan Xian said seriously. Fan Xian said seriously. Su Wenmao is in the palace treasury. I will leave Deng Ziyu in Suzhou. Deputy Ma Jie will handle the matter of transferring goods from the palace treasury. As for the matter of accounts, if you find it difficult to sort it out, listen to the opinions of those old officials. Those old officials were all good hands pulled from the Ministry of Revenue. They were a great gift that the Minister of Revenue Fan Jian had given to his son. It was ruthlessly simple to do some empty accounts and play some tricks. Xia Qifei made a sound of acknowledgement and hesitantly said, "This is the first time. The route to the north has been opened. However, we can't hide it for too long." Fan Xian thought for a bit and a cold smile rose to his brows. "What are you afraid of? Every year, Xinjiang is smuggled. Who doesn't know? As long as we don't get hold of our weakness, who can do anything to us?" Xia Qifei's heart froze. He found that the commissioner was indeed very daring and full of confidence. However, he kept thinking of another matter. His face couldn't help revealing a strange emotion. Fan Xian watched and couldn't help smiling. He gazed at him calmly and said, "Are you not satisfied with the Ming family matter?" Xia Qifei thought for a bit. The bits and pieces of this half a year taught him that it was best not to hide anything in front of this young man. Gritting his teeth, he gathered his courage and said, "Qing Cheng is not satisfied." Fan Xian gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. "The old Ming matriarch is already dead." Xia Qifei was silent. When the Ming garden was in chaos, he had been following orders to the north to deliver goods, so he had not participated in this matter. Along the way, he had received the news. He had also seen the scene of the Jiangnan people wearing mourning. He couldn't help smiling bitterly and saying, although she died, it was still a glorious death. Fan Xian quietly said, "Do you know how the old Ming matriarch died?" Xia Qifei raised his head in shock and gazed at Fan Xian, thinking, "Did you not help me force her to death?" Suddenly, his mind moved. He thought of how the hearts of the Jiangnan people were slightly chaotic and then calm, and how the main garden was unusually quiet after the funeral. He couldn't help but think of a terrifying possibility. Ming Qingda, he asked in disbelief. Fan Xian nodded his head coldly. I won't hide this from you. It is a small matter for the emperor to take over the Ming family, but it is a difficult matter for him to take over the Ming family peacefully. The present situation is something I have plotted with great difficulty. Don't destroy it. Xia Qifei immediately understood everything. So the commissioner and Ming Qingda had a secret agreement. He couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions in his heart. He also faintly felt fear. Would he become a useless, abandoned pawn? Fan Xian's following words surprised him again. You're not satisfied. Actually, I am not satisfied either. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said. The Ming family has 6 branches. Right now, you and I can only control 2 of them. After this matter, Ming Qingda has finally become the true master of the Ming family, but I cannot act openly. That old fox has tricked me. Do you think I won't have him return it? Xia Qifei opened his mouth slightly. A fervent hope flashed through his eyes. When do we act? Don't let the fever go to your head at the mention of revenge. Fan Xian seemed to be lecturing him. It was also like he was narrating some great, distant, and personal cause. The Jiangnan people's bloodletters have long been sent to Jingdou. The emperor's edict to scold me should arrive in a few days, Fan Xian continued. At this time, I will not act against Ming Qingda again. I don't understand. Xia Qifei thought of something and said doubtfully, what benefit does Ming Qingda gain by doing this? Would he be so childishly as to believe that as long as he lowers his head, the emperor will give him a way out? Fan Xian glanced at him with praise and said, he is just stalling for time. Stalling for time? Correct. Fan Xian sighed. Using his mother's life in exchange for a year's time. That day, I once said that your big brother does things even more ruthlessly than I do. A year's time? Xia Qifei asked with confusion. What use can it have? Naturally, Fan Xian would not tell him about the seemingly calm, but unusually dangerous situation in Jingdou. He only smiled coldly and said, your big brother is groveling and enduring, swaying from side to side, all because he wants to see clearly the situation in court a year from now. As for you and me, we will just watch for a year. After a year, the other side would probably be unable to resist acting, right? After a year, he would be able to kill some people. Don't rush. Fan Xian persuaded Xia Qifei and, at the same time, convinced himself. Your big brother is a clever person. In the end, he is swaying from side to side. He wants to not offend either side. So in the end, he will also die because of his cleverness. Because, in the end, he has no power. As Fan Xian said this, he suddenly thought of the 3 sentences Yi Luyan had said to him before his sword cut through half the building. Involuntarily, his heart chilled. Could it be that the great Grandmaster had seen further than him and had already seen some danger that he had not? After the imperial envoy was attacked in Baiwa brothel, the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, was furious. He immediately made a powerful response. All of the Ming Garden's private soldiers were disarmed. Because of the old Ming matriarch's death, the enmity the Jiangnan people had toward Fan Xian had also lessened somewhat because of Fan Xian's injury. The human heart had always been such a strange thing. In short, the power of Ming Garden had once again been weakened. It had become a piece of dough in Fan Xian's hands, allowing him to knead it however he wanted. However, the present situation in Jingdou and the imperial edict that was about to arrive forced him to push back the cooking of the steamed buns. Even if Ming Qingda completely defected to me, I would not accept it. The corners of Fan Xian's lips twitched, and he said something that made Xia Qifei unusually happy. Fan Xian calmly said, I am a very vengeful person. Perhaps you don't care about the water bandits' brothers who were killed in front of the Jiangnan restaurant, but I remember that a number of the 6th Bureau swordsmen I sent to protect you died. Xia Qifei's sorrow appeared slightly. Fan Xian continued, Ming Qingda is a clever person. As he said earlier, he thought that in the face of enormous benefits, I could accept the deaths of these seemingly normal people with a smile. However, he was wrong. He quietly said, "The Ming family asked people to kill my people, so I will kill their people." Although it was his mother who did it, the son pays the mother's debts. Isn't that very fair? Xia Qifei couldn't resist, smiling and bowed respectfully. Sir is right. It is very fair. Fan Xian patted Xia Qifei's shoulder. Let's not talk about those uninteresting things for now. In this half a year, you should learn to manage the route to the north well. At the same time, maintain a good relationship with the Xiong family of Ling Nan and the Sun family of Chuanzhou. As for Yang Jimei, you can also associate with her. In the future, you will have to manage such an enormous family property of the Ming family. You must maintain a good relationship with these giant merchants. Xia Qifei heard the meaning in the commissioner's words and couldn't help but be slightly shocked. He immediately said, "Thank you for fulfilling my wish." "It's still early," Fan Xian calmly said. Fan Xian calmly said, "However, I've already told Ming Qingda that you must appear at the annual festival in the 7th year of the Qing calendar." After Xia Qifei's great shock, a complicated joy welled up in his heart. Was he going to return to his ancestry? He had wandered the Jianghu for so many years. Finally, he could return to Ming Garden. Leaving Xia Qifei's manor, Fan Xian disapproved of Xia Qifei's last joy and the tears in his eyes. Was it really so important to return to his ancestry? After all, he was a person with 2 lives of experience. Although he knew how much importance the people of today placed on bloodlines, he still did not quite understand and even look down on it. The ones who gave birth to me are my parents. The ones who raised me are my parents. If you see me as a son, then I will see you as a parent. If you see me as an enemy, then I will see you as an enemy. That chest of silver was a bit too heavy. The second person to return to Suzhou Hua Garden surprised Fan Xian. At that time, Fan Xian was worrying in his study about whether or not he should bring the chest of silver in front of the hall when he went to Hangzhou to pick up Waner. That chest of silver was a bit too heavy. Just as he was thinking hard, a shadow appeared in front of his table and gave him a fright. "Next time you enter, please knock." Fan Xian glanced at the shadow and then lowered his head to read the council newspaper. The shadow suddenly tilted his head. His deathly pale face shone through the completely black clothing. It seemed to be very interested in Fan Xian. After all, even the director treated him like a nephew, but Fan Xian was different. "Yin Jilan has returned to Dongyi." Fan Xian raised his head. He knew this meant that the guerrilla warfare between the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the Aces of Dongyi had finally come to an end after continuing for 4 months. While Fan Xian was battling wits and strength against the enemy in the 3 large workshops of the palace treasury, at the bidding conference, in Suzhou, and in the Ming Garden, the silent killing on the other secret front was actually an important link that could completely turn the situation around. Furthermore, the battle on that front would certainly be even bloodier and more terrifying. He was silent for a moment and then solemnly said, "How many brothers in the council sacrificed?" 17. The shadow's words still did not have any obvious emotional fluctuations. How many people died on Dongyi's side? This was a topic that Fan Xian was very interested in. 17. Oh, 1 for 1. It seems we didn't lose out. Although he said he didn't lose out, an evil fire still flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. Gently tapping his finger on the surface of the table, he slowly said, "Remember this debt firmly. After some time, we'll go and get it back." The shadow said, "Are you going to get it back, or am I?" Fan Xian glanced at him and said with amusement, "Can you beat your idiot brother?" The shadow was not angry. "I can't beat him, but you also can't beat him." Fan Xian thought of the power of Yi Liyun's strike and admitted this reality. "Although I can't beat him, it doesn't mean I can't kill him." The shadow looked at him. He didn't know where this young man's confidence came from to say he could kill a great grandmaster. The study fell silent. Fan Xian continued his official duties and didn't even glance at the shadow in front of him. In the end, it was the shadow himself who broke the silence. "I heard. Yi Liyun came?" Fan Xian glanced at him and asked curiously, "How do you know it was Yi Liyun?" "Because Sigu Jian is still in Dongyi." Fan Xian sighed and shook his head. He thought to himself that even the shadow, someone who only knew how to kill, could make such a simple deduction. What exactly was Yi Luyan thinking? Will Sigurd not sneak out of Dongi? Although this was what Fan Xian thought, he still couldn't help but habitually want to frame Dongi and not want such a large crack to appear within the Qing kingdom. The shadow was silent for a moment and then said, "He hasn't left the sword hut in 6 years." Fan Xian was shocked. He knew the shadow's identity, so he trusted his judgment and source of information. If it was truly like this, then this matter was too strange. No wonder the Qing people had framed Sigurd countless times and Dongi had never had any direct reaction. Fan Xian suddenly thought of a wonderful possibility. Say, he propped up his chin and asked energetically, "Is it possible that your idiot brother has already died?" No. The shadow's words could only be met with a sigh from Fan Xian. As long as he doesn't go out, it's fine. Fan Xian immediately thought of another wonderful thing and smiled. As long as Sigurd doesn't go out, I'm not afraid someone will kill me. The shadow thought for a bit and silently accepted this reality. He then asked, "I heard Yi Luyan came." This was the second time the shadow had said this. It was clear Fan Xian didn't want to discuss this problem. He hadn't expected the other party to be so persistent. He couldn't resist saying angrily, "I also heard love has returned. Is it Yi Luyan? Did he come or not? Is that important?" "It is very important," the shadow said with a rare seriousness. The shadow used a rarely seen seriousness and said, "My idol is Sir Wu. The person I want to defeat the most is Sigurd. If I could fight with Sir Yi Luyan, it would be enough to comfort me for the rest of my life. Sir, I am jealous of you." Fan Xian was defeated. Sincerely, he said, "Don't be jealous of me. Next time something as good as this happens, I will certainly leave it for you. As for Yi Luyan, I can promise you that if you fight with him, the one to die will certainly be you, and it will be a very thorough death." The shadow was silent. He then turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. Fan Xian suddenly thought of something. Facing the completely empty night, he quietly said, "I'm going to Hangzhou the day after tomorrow. Come with me." He didn't know if Haidang would follow him to Hangzhou to pick up Wan'er. For the sake of safety, he had the shadow at his side. It was much more reassuring. After that night, Fan Xian and Haidang resumed their usual interactions. However, occasionally, when their gazes met, there would be something more unclear and unclear. Strangely, Haidang was as lazy as ever and quiet as ever. It was Fan Xian who became awkward. Occasionally, a smiling expression would appear in Haitang's eyes, which made Fan Xian very angry. However, this reality also made Fan Xian understand that even if he used underhanded methods to get the news out, he might not be able to tie such a unique woman to his side for a lifetime. Fan Xian had once encouraged Ruo to travel around, much less someone like Duo. However, Fan Xian was just as selfish as he had always admitted. There were very few young men in this world who dared to marry Haidang Duo. After he made such a big scandal, who would dare to marry her? Never marrying was fine as long as she didn't marry someone else. An evil smile flashed through his eyes. He tore open the letter Wang Qinian had sent back and hurriedly scanned it. He couldn't resist smiling again. It looked like Lao Wang was not having a good time in northern Qi. The burden on his back was too heavy. It was not as comfortable as being by his side. This letter was asking about the date of his return. Fan Xian understood his emotions. Being in a foreign country, one would indeed feel lonely. Furthermore, once things went wrong, regardless of whether it was the Overwatch Council or the court, they could all abandon him. This feeling of being an abandoned child was not good. As he thought about it, he suddenly sighed. Tonight, he had first met Xia Qifei, then the Shadow, and even Wang Qinian, who was far away in the north. They were all capable subordinates of his. As for the first two brothers, they both carried a blood feud with them. They were the youngest members of their large clans, drifting about the world, unable to return to their homes. In fact, wasn't his own life experience the same? The gathering of abandoned children would, in the end, become exciting. On the first day of the month, I seriously canvassed for monthly votes. Last month, 4th place, and 3,000 yuan in prize money, all thanks to everyone's votes. I express my sincere thanks. This month, I still have to seriously canvass for monthly votes. However, at the end of December, I told everyone that during this year's spring festival, my whole family will be returning to our hometown for the new year. I haven't been back in 10 years. Not to mention the many matters and the lack of time, the important thing is that our hometown is a small mountain village. There really is no place to write. I also don't have the habit of storing up manuscripts. Everyone knows this, so I'm also thinking about how to deal with it. In any case, I have to ask for leave in advance. This month's updates will certainly not be sufficient. As for monthly votes, if everyone is willing to vote for me, please do so. As for the book review, I have a few words to say. First, don't be rude in the discussion. Don't use foul language. I'll have to trouble everyone to maintain that. Second, regardless of whether you're male or female, if you want to scold Fan, please do so, because I'm writing about a selfish boy. But please don't scold me. I'm very weak. Haha. The important thing is everyone is an adult. You should understand the relationship between the characters in the book and the author. Third, thank you, everyone. Please have some tea. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 407. After Fan finished reading the council report, he felt his eyes dry up. He couldn't resist cursing a few times in his heart. When he was young, his name and courtesy name had been arranged by those people. His surname was Fan, his first name was Xian, and his courtesy name was Nji. Now that he thought about it, this name was naturally given to him by the emperor in the palace. However, ever since he entered Jingdo, or more accurately, since last year's spring examination, when had he ever had a day of leisure? Occasionally, he would ask himself, using the knowledge and experience of 2 lives to judge, Fan had to come to a conclusion that did not make him happy. The emperor in the palace had treated him well. Although he knew that the emperor had given him so much power, a large part of it was because the emperor needed someone like him to exist to balance the situation in court, and he had indeed demonstrated this ability. The royal family was heartless. For the emperor to be where he was today, on one hand, it had to be said that it was his mother's grace. On the other hand, it showed that the emperor did indeed have some father-son affection for him. At least, he was not like Han Wu, who was still alive and living better and better. Of course, Fan would not revel in this father-son affection. He was strangely clear-headed and calm. Thus, he was still a bit angry at the emperor for throwing him to Jiangnan and giving him so much work and such troublesome things. He was not a donkey, although Haidang seemed to like ordering Xija around like a donkey. He rubbed his eyes and took out the rectangular box beside him. Curiously, he tore open the seal on the outside. This was a gift Wang Qinian had carefully asked Xia Qifei to bring back. The letter said it was for him, but it did not say what it was. The box slowly opened, revealing the true appearance of the item inside. Fan narrowed his eyes. It was a sword that did not look extraordinary, but emanated an ancient aura. He took out the long sword. His right hand gripped the hilt steadily and slowly pulled. Without a sound, the edge of the sword left its sheath. Like the layer of snow on Tsang Mountain, like the smear of jade in North Lake, like a wisp of wind in Jiangnan, the clear and bright sword light rippled in the study. It was incomparably gentle, but there was a bone-piercing coldness in the gentleness. Fan expression changed slightly. He could see the value and sharpness of this sword. What particularly moved him was that the killing intent in this gentleness was quite similar to his own strange personality. He flipped his wrist and casually waved it twice. He felt that the weight of the sword was very suitable. The blade of the sword pierced through the air silently and brushed the candle 3 times, but the candle did not move at all. In the past, the weapons Fan was used to using were nothing more than a hidden crossbow and the slender, pure black dagger in his boot. Although he was very efficient when killing people, In the end, he did not have a weapon that suited him, particularly if he was fighting a true ace head-on. Because he had been stabbed by the shadow, Fan Xian had learned Sigu Sword's secret very effectively. These days, he had focused on practicing and could be considered to have made some progress. That night, he had killed Yuan Jingming, which was already proof of this. With Sigu's sword in his heart, Fan Xian increasingly wanted to wear a good sword. When he killed Yuan Ming, he had borrowed a flexible sword from Haidang. I can't live off a woman, and I'm embarrassed to keep borrowing her flexible sword. Fan Xian lightly flicked the edge of the sword and listened to a slight buzzing sound. He couldn't help but nod his head in approval, thinking that Lao Wang's flattery was truly appropriate. He picked up the piece of paper in the box and looked at it. On it was written Wang Qinyan's skillful flattery. First, he regretted that he shouldn't have peeked at Sir Fan's letter last year. Finally, he talked about the origin of this sword. So, this sword was the sword of the last emperor of the Wei Kingdom. Back then, the Wei Kingdom had been broken up by the Qin Kingdom. The Zhan family had taken advantage of the situation to rise, but the treasures in the royal palace had long been stolen and sold by the eunuchs. This sword had since then also wandered among the people, never to be seen again. It was only after 20 years that traces of it finally appeared. After Wang Qinian learned of it, he spent a large sum of money to buy it. He then carefully made some external changes before sending it to Jiangnan. So, it is this emperor's sword. Fan Xian looked at the sword and smiled, but he did not think much of it in his heart. If this sword truly had an imperial aura attached to it, the Northern Wei Emperor would not have died back then. However, he immediately furrowed his brows. Wang Qinian now knew that he was the emperor's illegitimate child. He had spent a large sum of money to buy the Wei Emperor's sword and had traveled thousands of li to give it to him. Was this purely flattery, or was he using this sword to hint at something? Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. He thought to himself, Wang Qinian was such an old man with a wife and daughter. How could he be so daring? He was probably thinking too much. He felt a bit uncomfortable in his heart. It looked like he was the same as the emperor. They were both suspicious people in their bones. Fan Xian blew out the candle and left the study to sleep peacefully. He couldn't resist muttering, Zorro. The room door closed, the moonlight was still, and the candle had broken into 4 pieces. One was frozen on the table, and the other 3 were rolling restlessly. 3 days later, the angels from Jingdou finally arrived in Suzhou. The angels were not those eunuchs with wings. They were eunuchs responsible for helping the emperor send messages. They could not fly, so they could only ride horses. Naturally, they were slower. Hua Garden was tidied up. The courtyard was swept, the incense table was set up, and the related matters were prepared. With Fan Xian in the lead, the 3rd prince as his deputy, everyone in the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council, as well as the 6 bureau guards and tiger guards, dozens of people stood obediently in front of the front yard, waiting for the arrival of the imperial edict. As the northern Qi Saint girl, it was not convenient for Haitang to be present. She had long left. However, Fan Xian and his group waited for a long time and still did not see anyone come. Fan Xian was a bit annoyed. He called for someone to bring over a grand wooden chair. He sat in the corridor and had Cici peel melon seeds beside him while he chatted idly with the 3rd prince. Deng Ziyu's expression appeared awkward. He moved closer to his ear and said, Sir, be careful. We have to wait. His gaze flickered to the side. Fan Xian knew what he wanted to say. The subordinates of the Overwatch Council did not matter. The 3rd prince was now dead set on following him. However, his actions did indeed appear to be somewhat disrespectful of the emperor's authority. There were also 7 tiger guards beside him, as well as a few tiger guards responsible for the 3rd prince's safety. Who knew whether or not there were people the emperor had sent to monitor him? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. During the trip to northern Qi, as well as the trip to Jiangnan, Gouda and the others had actually followed him. The 2 sides had gotten along fairly well. At least, they had not dragged him down or done anything that made him uncomfortable. Thus, Fan Xian had purposely revealed his true side for them to see. In any case, these 7 people would probably be his personal bodyguards for the rest of his life. Then, he would use the endless small mistakes to have them get used to his future big mistakes. Sometimes, a person's heart could not be bought. It could only be seduced. It was like this between men and women. It was actually also like this between men. As for the tiger guards beside the third prince, fortunately, Fan Xian didn't have to wait too long. Following the sound of a cannon salute from outside, a few palace guards took the lead and escorted a eunuch into the garden. Fan Xian had long stood up. Holding the third prince's hand, he went forward to greet them. He bowed deeply and quietly listened to the edict. The eunuch who came to announce the edict was Eunuch Yao. He was also an old acquaintance of Fan Xian's. The two of them exchanged glances. Eunuch Yao knew that this young master was anxious from waiting. His heart trembled. He quickly skipped over some of the procedures that could be skipped. He directly pulled open the bright yellow double damask edict and began to read it in a sharp voice. The contents of the imperial edict were not out of Fan Xian's expectations. Some of the sentences inside were even things that Fan Xian and the emperor had already discussed in secret letters. As the ruler of a country, he had to express shock and anger at the chaos in Jiangnan. The edict used seemingly harsh words to reprimand Fan Xian. However, in the edict, not a single word mentioned the Ming family. Fan Xian knelt on the ground. A glimmer of a smile flashed across the corners of his lips. This was as it should be. How could a mere Jiangnan noble family affect the heart of heaven? Although the matter this time could not be considered small, tens of thousands of people's blood letters had been sent to the capital, and a few rotten scholars were even going to file a lawsuit in Jingdo in front of the emperor. The emperor issuing an edict to reprimand Fan Xian could be considered giving the people of the world an explanation. However, in the imperial edict and the official documents of the court, they would never mention the Ming family and criticize Fan Xian for not handling matters carefully. As for what it was, the court did not say a word. This was what was called politics. It was just a few words of reprimand. Of course, it also fined Fan Xian a year's salary. There was no other punishment. Eunuch Yao's sharp voice stopped. Fan Xian and the others rose to give their thanks. They also asked about the emperor's health and other boring matters. Only then did Fan Xian accept the imperial edict with both hands and hand it to the official beside him to put away. Fine salary again? Fan Xian couldn't resist muttering. My old father, and I haven't had any income these years. Who's going to support the family? He and the third prince walked in first. Eunuch Yao, with his body hunched and a fawning smile, followed behind them with small, quick steps. Lao Yao, you have to return the silver to me. Otherwise, I can only eat porridge. Fan Xian smiled and scolded. Eunuch Yao put on a bashful face and hurried forward a few steps. Please spare me. Who doesn't know that you are the best at earning silver in the world? You've been in Jiangnan for less than half a year, and you've earned tens of millions of liang for the court. Why would you need my scraps of silver? As Eunuch Yao spoke, he silently and quickly glanced toward the third prince out of the corner of his eyes. Fan Xian's earlier joke could be said to be a big deal or a small one. In the past, the Fan family had indeed fed the eunuchs in the palace well. Of course, he knew that Fan Xian did not think much of his gains. However, this mischievous joke had been said in front of the third prince. Eunuch Yao knew that although the little prince was young, his heart was ruthless. He couldn't help but feel a bit afraid. Unexpectedly, he saw from the corner of his eye that the third prince's expression was calm, as if he hadn't heard it. He then thought that since Fan Xian dared to say such things in front of the third prince, then he must have a sense of propriety. Eunuch Yao's heart trembled. He knew that the things the palace guessed might not be wrong. The third prince and Sir Fan Jr. were indeed like that. I don't have the guts to touch the silver earned for the court. Are you perhaps advising me to be corrupt? The three of them had already entered the central hall. Fan Xian and the third prince sat on either side of the main seats. Eunuch Yao stood to the side. Hearing these words, he forced a smile and said, Sir Fan Jr., please don't make fun of me. Fan Xian smiled and waved his hand to indicate for him to sit. Eunuch Yao quickly sat down. This long journey had indeed made him very tired. I thought you would come earlier. You made me wait for a while. Fan Xian said as he ate sunflower seeds. The third prince was also imitating Fan Xian's manner of eating sunflower seeds. Eunuch Yao looked closely and suddenly felt that his eyes were a bit blurry. These brothers in the upper seats were indeed too similar. It was just that one was a size bigger and one was a size smaller. He quickly smiled apologetically and explained, "I indeed arrived at the courier station outside the city yesterday. However, I had to follow the rules and could only enter the city today. There are 2 copies of the imperial edict. I went to the governor's manor first, so I came late. Please don't blame my legs for not being nimble." He carefully watched Fan Xian's expression and found that this young noble, who was so popular in court it was almost purple, did not show any signs of true anger. Only then did he let out a breath. In reality, with the identity of an imperial edict eunuch, he was like the emperor's mouthpiece. He was incomparably arrogant when he walked through the 7 roads and provinces. Even earlier in Xueqing's manor, the Jiangnan governor Xueqing had been very courteous toward this eunuch Yao of the palace. However, he could be arrogant anywhere. Only in Hua Garden did eunuch Yao not dare to be arrogant. Putting aside the fact that Fan Xian was some imperial envoy, just the identity of these 2 princes and Fan Xian's overwhelming power was enough to make eunuch Yao incomparably well-behaved. "Of course, I know you have to go to Governor Xue first," Fan Xian said without good humor. "Do you think I don't even know this little rule?" He shook his head and said, "What did the emperor say to the governor?" Eunuch Yao thought for a bit and said awkwardly, "Actually, it was pretty much the same as the edict he gave you." "Oh, Xueqing was also fined a year of salary?" Fan Xian raised his head and asked with interest. However, the tone of his question seemed to be a bit of schadenfreude. Eunuch Yao chuckled sinisterly and raised 3 fingers. "Fine for 3 years. Now I feel more balanced mentally." Fan Xian smiled and threw away the sunflower seed shells. "I said the emperor was wise and benevolent. He would not let a pitiful person like me take all the blame." Eunuch Yao smiled bitterly and thought to himself, "What are you saying? How am I supposed to respond?" Fortunately, Fan Xian immediately changed the topic and asked, "Why did they find an old man like you to come on such a long and arduous journey? Are there no young and capable eunuchs in the palace?" At the time, Lao Dai was training a few. As you know, after that incident, although he was recently transferred back from that pitiful place, this matter was delayed. This time, the imperial edict coming to Jiangnan was important, so I had to make a trip. Eunuch Yao sighed. "Is Lao Dai doing well?" Fan Xian asked. Eunuch Yao smiled. "Thanks to your great fortune, these old brothers in the palace are doing pretty well." The Qing Kingdom's palace was not the same as in history. Since the founding of the country, it had been very guarded against eunuchs. Particularly after the previous emperor ascended the throne 20 years ago, he strictly prevented eunuchs from interfering in national affairs. The palace was very strict. It was difficult for eunuchs to wield power, so they were not divided into many factions. On the contrary, these eunuchs knew that it was difficult for them to live in society and were very united. Ever since Fan Xian entered the capital, he had paid great attention to building a good relationship with these seemingly unremarkable eunuchs. When he was purging the first bureau, he had let Lao Dai's nephew go, which was the same as letting Lao Dai go. Furthermore, he had taken good care of them and never made excessive requests of these eunuchs. Most importantly, each time Fan Xian interacted with these eunuchs, he did not think of them as strange or evil people. He treated them as normal and did not purposely curry favor or humiliate them. He was not warm in front of them, but sinister behind their backs. It was this way of doing things that successfully made the eunuchs like this young commissioner very much. As long as they're doing well, Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head. Qing Kingdom's eunuchs generally did not have too many bad records. These abnormal people were indeed a bit pitiful. He pretended to mention it carelessly. Lao Dai didn't train many young ones. However, last year, that little guy called Hong Zhu in the royal study seemed to be quite clever. Hong Zhu has already gone to the Eastern Palace. The deputy eunuch is the Emperor's Grace. Eunuch Yao replied carefully. Everyone in the palace knew that Hongzhu had been chased out of the royal study because Fan Xian had said something in front of the emperor. The rumor was that Hongzhu had been blinded by money and dared to extend his hand to Sir Fan Jr. for a bribe. Fan Xian's expression darkened slightly. After thinking for a while, he sighed and said, "This is also good. This kind of overly clever person is never suitable to serve the emperor. He doesn't know when to advance or retreat, and he doesn't know when to stop." Too clever? This was clearly derogatory. Eunuch Yao thought to himself that the rumors were indeed true. Hongzhu didn't usually look stupid, so how did he dare to provoke Sir Fan Jr.? It looked like that kid wouldn't be able to climb out of the palace. After sending off Eunuch Yao, Fan Xian led the third prince to the study. After a moment of silence, he quietly said, "Do you understand why?" The third prince thought for a while. In the end, he was still young and didn't understand the reason. He helplessly shook his head. It's the end of spring and the beginning of summer. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "We are about to go to Hangzhou. On the way, I still have to make a trip out. The Jiangnan matter has basically been settled. At most, the palace will keep you by my side for a year, which is near the end of the year. We will definitely return to the capital. When we come out again, it will only be me and not you." "Why?" the third prince asked in surprise. "There's no why." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "In the eyes of some people, perhaps I have a strange and unfriendly aura. You're a true prince of royal blood. If you are with me for a long time, I'm afraid you will be infected with some bad habits." "But," the third prince hurriedly said, "following Sir to Jiangnan to learn, this is something Father personally promised." "Father? Emperor?" Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. "If the Empress Dowager misses you, her youngest grandson, the Emperor can only summon you back." The third prince fell silent. He knew in his heart that his imperial grandmother was different from other grandmothers. She did not like her youngest grandson very much. Instead, she especially valued the crown prince and his second brother. In other words, Fan Xian said, "Starting from next year, you will be alone in Jingdou, and I cannot always stay by your side." The third prince raised his head. A ruthlessness that did not match appeared on his childish and beautiful face. "Sir, don't worry. I will live well and wait for your return." "You're saying childish things again." Fan Xian smiled and scolded. "By the emperor's side, who would dare to do anything to you?" He slowly said, "However, starting from now, you must stand out. At least, you must let the officials in court and the soldiers in the military know you and get used to you." "Get used to what?" "Get used to the fact that you're also an upright prince and not a child who only knows how to run his nose," Fan Xian said coldly. "Get used to you is also possible. It's also possible for you to do the same." The third prince had been with Fan Xian for half a year. He had long admired this elder brother to the bone. He felt that being by Fan Xian's side was far more pleasant than the cold atmosphere in the royal palace. At such a young age, he could only believe and was only willing to believe what Fan Xian said. However, he still asked curiously, "Sir, shouldn't you first endure silently? You once said that the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. You are still not a towering tree." Fan Xian smiled and rubbed the third prince's head, although this action was disrespectful. "Since the emperor has you follow me down to Jiangnan, you can no longer hide. Since you can't hide, then I might as well stand out and stand behind you. Let's see which wind dares to blow against you." The third prince scratched his face, not quite understanding. "I want to send a message to Jingdou through Eunuch Yao's mouth." Fan Xian pulled back his hand and slowly closed his eyes. "You are the person I have chosen." The third prince suddenly gathered his courage and said, "Even if the crown prince, in the end, it is still father's choice." Fan Xian didn't open his eyes. He only quietly said, "The eldest princess has chosen your second brother. The Empress Dowager has chosen your brother. Although the emperor has not chosen, many people have already begun to choose. Why would they care if I am one more? There is no more snow outside the window. I wish everyone good health. I wish my friends in the South all the best. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu. Calm. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 408. The spring wind did not care about the wind and moon, nor did the summer wind. It was just the damp, clear, or stuffy air that carried on endlessly rubbing itself. However, the people in the air would give rise to appropriate emotions because of the rubbing of heaven and earth. So what if it's clear? Do you think the Qing Emperor will believe your statement? Haidang was wearing a light green robe with 2 large pockets sewn on it. Her hands were in the pockets, as usual. She looked at Fan Xian and spoke with a smile. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly. He knew what she meant. He wanted Eunuch Yao to send the scene in Jiangnan back to Jingdo and let everyone in court know that he had chosen the 3rd prince. If it had been in the past, Fan Xian would certainly not have committed such a taboo by taking sides before the emperor made his choice. However, it was different now. The power in Fan Xian's hands was too great. He had to declare to the emperor that he had no interest in that chair. The problem was just as Haitang said. Why should the emperor believe him? Just based on the 3rd prince? After the emperor passed away, if Fan Xian supported the 3rd prince to take the throne, given the power in his hands and the background behind him, he could, at any time, make the 3rd prince a mere figurehead, regent, or something like that. The emperor is healthy and in the prime of his life. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said, "The matters of the future are too far away. I can't always be a lonely official. Furthermore, he placed the 3rd prince by my side, so I will follow his wishes. As for what consequences will it cause?" He narrowed his eyes and looked at the thin lake in front of him and the faint mist on the lake. In a quiet voice, he said, "I've been thinking about a problem for a long time." Haidang yawned and covered her mouth. "What problem?" "I also stood out this time because I wanted to put some pressure on the 2 brothers in the capital," Fan Xian said with a smile. The 2 brothers he spoke of were the crown prince and the 2nd prince. "I really want to force them to do something desperate. Otherwise, if they keep dragging their feet, who knows how tall my mother-in-law is? Is she as tall as a building?" He shook his head. "I just don't want to wait anymore." Haitang's heart jumped slightly. She turned her face to look at him. "You really plan on laying your cards on the table?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "I haven't finished speaking. I want to force the 2 brothers to do something desperate, but what about His Majesty? He had the 3rd prince follow me to Jiangnan, so he must have thought that the situation would develop like this in the future. The 3rd prince was also involved, and his attitude was so ambiguous. How could the crown prince feel good? Now that the 2nd prince can't go up or down, he can't just let it go like this. Could it be that our emperor also wants to force his own son to rebel?" After clarifying his doubts, the chill in his heart eased a little, and he let out a sigh. Haidang lowered her head and said, "Even if the imperial clan is heartless, in the end, he is still a father. Is there a need to toy with his own son like this?" Fan Xian nodded. "That is also what I do not understand." "Congratulations," Haitang suddenly said. Fan Xian asked in surprise, "What is there to be happy about? Since your thoughts are so similar to your country's emperors, then in the coming year, naturally, you will win," Haitang said softly. Fan Xian thought for a moment, and then quietly said, "It looks like you have more confidence in my emperor than I do in him." "Because you are a southerner," Haitang said indifferently. "Because after you entered the capital, the Qing emperor has always appeared somewhat quiet, so you have not experienced his terror. When he was still the crown prince, he led 3 expeditions to the north. With a remote Qing kingdom, he split the mighty Wei kingdom into pieces and beat all the other countries under heaven until they were as silent as cicadas in winter. Such methods, such terror. If I stand in your position and think about it, naturally, I have great confidence in him. The ruler of your country is a great ruler." Haitang very directly praised the foreign emperor. Haidang directly praised the foreign emperor. "In these 2 years, the lion hasn't been sleeping. He's just narrowing his eyes to digest the food in his stomach. However, if someone really dares to try and touch his position, his eyes will open and he will mercilessly tear the enemy into countless pieces." Fan Xian fell silent. Actually, I understand. That is why I want to do this matter, not him. When all is said and done, you are still a passionate person. Haitang gazed at him with a not-quite-there smile. Although you often like to hide your benevolence under the guise of selfishness, you are still a passionate person. If the Qing Emperor finally acts in a rage, blood will flow like rivers. You do not want to see this situation, so you want to do it yourself to suppress the destructive power of this matter to the minimum. Fan Xian lowered his head, tacitly agreeing with this statement. No matter how much hatred he had with the eldest princess of Xinjiang, the crown prince, and the second prince, the eldest princess was, after all, one Er's birth mother. That lovely Yiling had also become the second princess. Once the battle over the throne erupted, it would certainly bring disaster to the family. Fan Xian was a cold and emotionless person in many ways, but he did not want thousands of heads to hang on the walls of Jingdo and dirty blood to wet the walls. The second prince, who was very similar to him, smiled so shyly. Could he still smile like that after becoming a human head? If the emperor and he won, what would happen to the Yi family? What would happen to Yiling? For Fan Xian, this was a problem. For the emperor, this was not a problem. Thus, Fan Xian strongly hoped to be able to take the initiative in solving this problem, but Haitang quietly said, "You should also understand that you alone cannot solve this problem. Your enemies still have many powers that are beyond what you can handle. Against those people, the Qing Emperor has his own plans. He does not need you to do it for him. In the end, you are only the sharpest sword in his hand, and he is the hand holding the sword." Fan Xian knew she was talking about the Juanshan conference and nodded silently. "There is also the Empress Dowager," Haitang said with a slight smile. Fan Xian found a glimmer of sadness in the smile in her eyes. He couldn't resist muttering, "Both empresses are very troublesome." It was clear that Haitang did not want to continue this unsolvable topic. Her gaze, intentionally or not, landed on the ancient sword at his waist. Wang Qimian sent it. Fan Xian met her gaze and explained, "I heard it was the sword of the last Wei Emperor." Haitang's expression did not change. It was as if she had long known the origins of this sword. In a clear and cold voice, she said, "Be careful not to arouse too much discussion." Fan Xian smiled. "Thank you for the reminder. I had originally thought that not many people would recognize it." Haitang lowered her head. No one knew what she was thinking. A moment later, she faintly said, "It has only been 30 years since the destruction of the Wei Kingdom. Although Shao, In, and Zhuang Mohan, the last spiritual symbols of the Wei Kingdom, have already passed away, it has not been that long. In this world, there are many people who remember the event of that time." Fan Xian didn't know why the girl was acting so strangely. An absurd feeling welled up in his heart. Presently, the world could be said to be peaceful, and everywhere could be said to be prosperous. Who would have thought that just 20 years ago, the world was still a large battlefield? At that time, there were endless battles. Countless people died. One large country was destroyed, and two large countries were born. Blood flowed on the green hills, and the yellow waves piled up corpses. Among the hundreds of thousands of white bones, the important figures who now led the way of the world were born. The two of them fell silent and stared at the show lake in front of them in a daze. This show lake was not the show lake of Baoyue Brothel in Jingdo. It was the lake behind Baoyue Brothel in Suzhou. Last month, Fan Xian had sent a letter to the people in Jiangnan to start digging the lake. He had used a number of laborers and forcefully doubled the size of the show lake. Now, if one looked back from Baoyue Brothel, the scenery was even more beautiful than it was then. However, Baoyue Brothel had been cut in half by that strike. At this time, they were still busy repairing it. Thus, Fan Xian and Haitang could only stand coldly by the lake and watch the mist on the surface of the lake gather and disperse and gather again. It was as impermanent as life and the world. "Your brothel is repairing very slowly." Haitang seemed to have inadvertently mentioned this. "I'm embarrassed to use your northern cheese silver in front of you. It's too much." Fan Xian smiled and immediately explained, "There's no rush to repair the building. I brought over some professionals from the capital to carefully examine the sword marks in the building. The so-called professionals were the people from the second and third bureaus. Presently, the broken Baiwa brothel was Yi Liuyun's first crime scene. Fan Xian hoped to be able to dig out some of the great grandmaster's true methods of attack from the sword marks and aura for future use. Haidang said, "I've gone to see." Oh, Fan Xian's eyes lit up. He knew that this girl's insight and knowledge of martial arts were much higher than his. He thought that she must have discovered something. The 8 pillars were cut down at the same time. Haidang recalled the fine marks in the building and couldn't resist sighing. The other cracks were only caused by sword intent. If you and I want to cut down the pillars, we could barely do it, but that kind of control over power. Who knows how many years and months it would take to reach that kind of realm? Fan Xian lowered his head and said, "In your opinion, for such a heaven-shaking strike, how many times can Yi Luyun strike out?" 3. Haidang said straightforwardly. "This is under normal circumstances. If that old man put his life on the line, no one knows what kind of miracle would happen." It was indeed a miracle. For a human to be able to demonstrate a method like the might of heaven and earth. "You're really not coming with me?" Fan Xian faced the surface of the lake and let out a deep breath. "There has to be someone left in Suzhou," Haidang said with a slight smile. "Besides, you shamelessly had the 8th Bureau publicize our private affairs. If we really went to Hangzhou, what would I do? Even if you're a shameless person, you have to understand me a little." It was a straightforward hidden bitterness. Although she said it with a smile, it was impossible for Fan Xian to resist. He smiled slightly and said, "Then I'm leaving." Haidang bowed slightly and said in a quiet voice, "I won't see you out." In the early morning in Suzhou, the wind and fog above the lake welcomed the sunlight and quickly dispersed. The young man and woman did not say another word. They naturally parted and walked along the lakeside in different directions. It did not take long to leave Suzhou. Fan Xian had originally prepared to live by West Lake in Hangzhou while he was in Jiangnan. However, because the Ming family matter was unexpectedly thorny and there were many more unexpected stories, he had stayed until now. Knowing that he was going to move to Hangzhou, his subordinates had long prepared everything. Even the girls in Hua Garden, under Cici's lead, had made preparations to move. Fan Xian did not return Hua Garden to the salt merchant. After all, Haidang still had to stay in Suzhou and keep an eye on the large amounts of silver in the Palace Treasury Transport Company and Zhaoshang Money House. Thus, he had to give the girl a place to live. He had also carefully left behind a few average-looking but efficient serving girls. Naturally, Yang Jimei would not feel heartache for this garden. On the contrary, she was extremely happy. At the farewell banquet, Yang Jimei eagerly sat at the lower end of the table. She didn't hear what the 2 high-ranking officials were saying. She only felt that her ancestors' graves were emitting green smoke. She was actually able to eat at the same table as the imperial envoy. The meal did not take long. The Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, the rarely seen inspector, the Suzhou Zhizhou who was currently being investigated by the Overwatch Council, and these officials all came to see Fan Xian off. However, because of the vicious situation in the bamboo shed that day with the dragon raising its head, none of the Jiangnan officials, big or small, dared to give any gifts. However, Xue Qing did not avoid preparing expensive gifts. The weight of the gift list made Fan Xian involuntarily speechless. After the banquet, Fan Xian and Xue Qing walked casually in the garden. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Sir, you spoil me like this. First, I can't afford it. Second, how can I properly lecture these Jiangnan road officials in the future?" His words carried a double meaning. Xue Qing laughingly scolded, "It's not like it's for you. You have to take it even if you don't want to." Fan Xian was puzzled. Xue Qing said in a clear voice, "Half of it is for the young lady of the Lin family. No, it should be Lady Fan. It's her first time in Hangzhou, so she certainly didn't bring enough things with her. This is for her." He continued, "The other half is for my teacher. I have been busy with official business in Suzhou and have been unable to go personally to express my filial piety. I hope Sir Fan Jr. will help me bring this gift." Fan Xian smiled. A few days ago, He had already informed Xueqing of his upcoming trip to Wuzhou and had written it in a letter to the emperor. Only now did he remember that no matter what, Xueqing had to prepare a heavy gift. Having thought this through, he didn't say anything more. In a quiet voice, Fan Xian said, "I will be in Hangzhou. If you have any orders, please send a letter." "I wouldn't dare," Xueqing smiled and said. "You are also the imperial envoy. I wouldn't dare to give orders, but there will always be trouble." Fan Xian casually replied. He knew that Xueqing had long hoped for him to leave Suzhou, so he didn't point it out. Just as they were about to part, Xueqing suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "Sir Fan Jr., there is one thing I have not found the answer to." "Sir, please speak," Fan Xian said seriously. Xueqing was silent for a moment and then said, "Sir, just how old are you this year?" Given his status as the Jiangnan governor, he didn't use conventional greetings. Instead, he used the tone of an elder to ask. Fan Xian chuckled and said, 19. Xueqing paused slightly. On the contrary, it was the truth of the rumors that he didn't dare believe. He couldn't resist shaking his head and smiling bitterly. Indeed, heroes come from youth. After the imperial envoy left the city, Hua Garden immediately became much quieter. Suzhou, which had long been under the powerful pressure of the Overwatch Council and Fan Xian, seemed to come alive in a day. After confirming that the black carriages from the Fan Manor had left the city gates, the people of Suzhou began to spread the news. Hot tears filled their eyes. The treacherous official had finally left. Some people even began to set off firecrackers. That night, the officials of Jiangnan Road, particularly the Suzhou government, also began to celebrate. They congratulated each other for not having been invited by the Overwatch Council to drink tea. As for the officials who had already fallen, no one gave them another glance. Although Suzhou and Hangzhou were not far apart, it was impossible for Fan Xian to hear the firecrackers of the Suzhou people sending off the plague. Later, although the secret agents of the Overwatch Council had reported it, he had only dismissed it with a laugh. The group of people stayed in the Peng family manor by West Lake in Hangzhou and returned to the time when they first arrived in Jiangnan. Fan Xian's but hadn't even touched the ground when he asked, "Where is the madam?" A subordinate reported, "There seems to be some obstruction. There's also Shazhou." Fan Xian was slightly startled. A wave of unease rose in his heart. After thinking for a moment, he didn't say anything more. Leading the 7 tiger guards, he rode toward Shazhou. Dusk arrived in Shazhou. Because Fan Xian was worried about Wanner, he gave up his usual carriage and rode directly. When he entered Shazhou, he felt as if his entire body was falling apart. The faces of the subordinates and tiger guards behind him were deathly pale. They had almost collapsed from exhaustion on this day's journey. A dozen fine horses broke through the silence of the night in Shazhou and came directly to a manor. This manor had once been Jiangnan Shui Han's branch in Shazhou. Now, it had long been taken over by the Overwatch Council. After some repairs, it had become Fan Xian's private residence in name. Fan Xian flipped off his horse. Ignoring the greetings of his subordinates at the door, he directly charged into the courtyard. Just as he was about to enter the stone steps into the inner residence, he saw a familiar person. It was the wife of the Teng family. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked, "What is it, young master?" A glimmer of joy flashed through the eyes of the wife of the Teng family. "Why are you here?" "The mistress is fine. She's just resting in the room." Fan Xian didn't believe her. Logically speaking, Wanner should have arrived in Hangzhou today. She had probably been delayed because something had happened to her body. He hurriedly pushed open the door and entered. Like a gust of wind, he swept to the side of the bed. With a flip of his hand, the wind pushed the door shut tightly. He gazed at the girl lying on the bed and the thread of exhaustion on that familiar and beautiful face. He couldn't resist feeling heartache and said, "Your body isn't good, so walk slower." Lin Wanner gazed at him with a smile and said, "Walk slower, so you'll have more time to be happy." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Where did you get all these witty words from?" As he spoke, his finger had already gently rested on his wife's jade-white wrist and began to feel her pulse. What Fan Xian was most worried about was Wanner's body. After all, she had been infected with a lung disease for a number of years. Although he had carefully taken care of her these 2 years and had the medicine teacher, Fei Jia, personally made, Wanner's body was still weak. He was afraid she wouldn't be able to stand the cold on the road. His finger gently rested on Wanner's wrist. Fan Xian's expression gradually became serious, particularly the feeling of his hand. It made his heart jump slightly. How had Wanner become so thin? You stopped taking the medicine? Feeling the abnormality of the pulse, Fan Xian pulled back his finger like he had been electrocuted. He gazed at his wife in shock. His eyes were filled with concern and confusion. Lin Wanner slowly pulled back her hand and gently coughed. She gazed at Fan Xian and spoke calmly with a glimmer of determination and joy. Yes, I stopped taking the medicine. Before Ro left, she brought Master Ku He to the manor to sit for a while. Master Ku, he said that Sir Fei's medicine was too powerful. If Wanner wanted to have children, she had to stop taking the medicine. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 409. Hearing Wan Er's words, Fan Xian's face immediately darkened. He immediately remembered that his wife's body was not well. He quickly put on a warm smile and said, "What are you thinking about? Sir Fei is my teacher. He has seen me grow up. When we were married, that medicine was a good medicine that my teacher had painstakingly fished out of Dongi. How could he not understand the principle of being a tyrant? During this year, you've been taking that medicine. Your body is clearly getting better. You can't stop, you silly girl." Lin Wanner smiled slightly. There was a glimmer of tiredness in her smile. In a quiet voice, she said, "Naturally, Sir Fei's medicine is good, but what Master Ku He said," without waiting for his wife to finish, Fan Xian had already said firmly, "Of course, Master Ku He is at the top of the world when it comes to fighting and discussing. But when it comes to treating illnesses and taking medicine, he can't even compare to a finger of my teacher and I. Listen to him. It's better to listen to his sow." Although he was restraining himself, Wanner still heard the anger in the depths of his words. Gently pulling on his hand, she comfortingly said, "Don't be angry. Although I've stopped taking the medicine, the imperial doctor has come see me. He said that my old illness has healed. It is just that the qi in my body has been rushing recently, so my body is a bit weak." Fan Xian shook his head and half sat on the bed. Pulling Wanner into his embrace, he gently patted her shoulder and said, "Your body is the most important. Don't listen to what other people say." Wanner leaned into his embrace and was silent for a moment. Slowly she said, "But I really want to have a child." Fan Xian was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. A moment later, he said, "I don't want to be angry at you, but I want you to know that there is nothing to discuss in this matter. As long as your body is good, what does it matter if you have a child or not?" In the present world, not having an heir was considered a great sin. Wanner and Fan Xian had been married for a year and a half, yet there was still no movement in her stomach. This girl always remembered this matter and felt very sad. Hearing Fan Xian's powerful and resonant words at this moment, she couldn't help but be startled for a moment. Wanner's emotions were very complicated. She seemed to be happy, but there was also a faint sadness mixed with a bit of embarrassment. Fan Xian looked at his wife's sad expression in his arms and couldn't help but sigh. He stretched out his finger and gently rubbed between her brows. In a quiet voice, he said, "In this world, there are many idiots who think that not being able to have children is a woman's problem. Actually, let me tell you, whether or not you can have children is a matter between husband and wife. I think it is very likely that I have some kind of disease. What does that have to do with you?" This was a joke meant to comfort Wanner, but Wanner was dumbfounded. She thought that her husband was really thick-skinned to be able to say that word. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she vaguely understood that he was trying to put the blame on her. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. "What nonsense are you talking about? What does it have to do with a man whether or not I can have children?" Fan Xian laughed and said, "Who said it doesn't matter? Why don't you try asking Old Yao and Old Dai in the palace to give birth to 2 children? Lin Wanner was startled again. Fan Xian continued to smile and said, even the incomparably profound eunuch Hong wouldn't be able to have a child if you asked him to. So, having children is a matter between a man and a woman. Lin Wanner immediately came back to her senses. A blush appeared on her cheeks. She spat and said, the more you talk, the more ridiculous it is. Fan Xian stopped laughing and said seriously, then let's talk about serious things. You have to insist on taking the medicine. Lin Wanner listened and made a sound of acknowledgement, but her eyes flashed. Fan Xian lowered his head to look and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He knew he would not be able to convince her. Wanner, this girl, was usually a simple and cheerful person. Inside, she was exceptionally intelligent. However, when it came to important matters that involved her and Fan Xian, she was particularly stubborn. The scientific reasoning that Fan Xian spoke of was probably something that even someone as unconventional as Haidang would not believe. Naturally, Wanner was the same. Why must we have children? Fan Xian tenderly held his wife and quietly said, look at your childhood life in the palace. Think of how I was exiled to Danzhou as a child. You will know that after we have children, we still have to raise them. If we can't raise them well, we might as well not have had them in the beginning. Lin Wanner lowered her head and pressed her lips together. Very calmly and confidently, she objected, we are not them. We can raise children well. Fan Xian felt a glimmer of helplessness. But if it really can't be born because of me, then it's better not to have children. It's not as important as your body. Although Lin Wanner felt warm, she still stubbornly shook her head. I just want a child. Fan Xian felt a headache coming on and said, always so stubborn. Lin Wanner raised her head to look at him. Her long eyelashes gently blinked. I want to have a child with you. This year, you've been either in Northern Qi or Jiangnan. I've been very lonely. Although it was only a part of the reason, it still made Fan Xian feel a deep sense of guilt. He didn't know what to say. The two of them hugged each other quietly. Perhaps it was because she was aroused by the body heat. Wanner began to cough gently again. She didn't want Fan Xian to worry, so she forcefully suppressed it. Her little face was bright red and appeared very pitiful. Fan Xian's heart ached. He gently rubbed her chest and comfortingly said, don't think so much. After we get to Hangzhou, I'll help you take good care of yourself. As for Sir Fei's medicine, I'll analyze in detail. No matter what, you can't stop. Lin Wanner raised her head and gazed at him pitifully like a kitten. Fan Xian's face darkened and pretended to be fierce. This matter is not up for discussion. Lin Wanner pouted her full lips and rubbed her head against his chest unwillingly. Fan Xian sighed and began to massage her to relax her mind. His fingers moved around and sent in threads of pure Tianyi Daojianqi. Wanner felt her body warm up and her mind gradually become clear. After a long and arduous journey, the exhaustion in her body grew stronger. Just like that, she peacefully leaned against his body and fell asleep. Fan Xian walked out of the bedroom and stretched, relaxing his stiff limbs. The wife of the Tang family came up to greet him and told him what had happened along the way. As Fan Xian listened, he nodded his head. It looked like after leaving Jingdou and not under his father's watch, Wanner had stopped taking the medicine. This action could be said to be brave, but it could also be said to be reckless. However, Fan Xian could not feel any anger. Although, in the depths of his heart, he still thought that Wanner should love herself the most. In the end, it was for the matter of the child. How could he bear to make Wanner sad? He ordered the wife of the Tang family to prepare the commonly used medicine. The wife of the Tang family said awkwardly, if the mistress doesn't want to take it, what should we do? Fan Xian lowered his head and thought for a moment. When it's ready, tell me. I'll go feed her. Joy surged onto the wife of the Tang family's face. She praised the heavens a few times and happily left. Arriving at the front hall, Deng Ziyu, who had sent to the west of Shazhou to pick up Wanner, bowed and greeted him. He also told him what had happened along the way. Presently, the Jiangnan water bandits were well behaved. There was also the Jiangnan Navy stationed in Shazhou, so Warner and her group went down the river without encountering any problems. Fan Xian nodded and sat in the chair. Suddenly, he sighed. A faint worry rose to his face. Deng Ziyu paused slightly. He thought to himself, even when his superior was facing the second prince in Jingdou or killing people in the night in Jiangnan, he had never revealed such a serious expression. What was going on? He guessed in his heart that the battle for the first wife in the Fan Manor had already begun. He couldn't help but lower his head in fear and keep quiet, not saying a word. Fan Xian had no idea what he was thinking in his heart. He was only thinking back to what Warner had said earlier. Sir Fei's medicine really had such serious side effects. From Danzhou to Jingdou, before they were married, before he met Warner in the Qing temple, Fan Xian knew that his wife had been infected with tuberculosis. In today's world, this illness was basically an incurable disease. However, when a young man and woman met, they always had incomparable courage to welcome the future disaster. At the time, he had only forcefully suppressed the faint fear. Fortunately, there was Sir Fei. On the night of the wedding, Sir Fei had hurried back from Dongyi with great difficulty and brought back the strange medicine that specialized in treating tuberculosis. The medicine was called ice smoke. This medicine took a full 4 years of Sir Fei's time. 4 years before the wedding, there were already rumors of a marriage between the Fan and Lin families in the palace. After using so much energy and time, the strange medicine was indeed effective. After the wedding, Warner persisted in taking it. Each time, she only scraped a small amount from the pill and swallowed it with a medicinal soup. Her body gradually improved, and she no longer coughed. The imperial physicians in the palace all thought that the princess' tuberculosis had already been miraculously cured. But side effects? Vinegar made turtle shell. Fan Xian thought back to the ingredients in the pill. Rehmannia, donkey's gelatin, beeswax. What does this have to do with making a child? He immediately thought of Fei Jie's expression when he spoke on the night of the wedding. After taking the medicine, you are forbidden from sexual intercourse for a month. Naturally, this was a naughty joke. Now that Fan Xian thought back, he realized that his teacher seemed to have hidden some important information. Later, Fan Xian had always felt it was strange why Sir Fei rarely saw him. It was as if he was hiding from something. Could it be? The true side effect of this ice smoke was to harm the patient's reproductive function? Fan Xian sat in the chair and couldn't help but shake his head. As long as Warner's illness could be cured, as long as her tuberculosis did not come back, as long as she was healthy, was it important whether or not she could make a child? Speaking of his previous life, Fan Xian felt that the most inexplicable scene in that world was the one he would occasionally see on television or in novels. The doctor in the delivery room, full of caution, came out of the delivery room and told the family of the pregnant woman that she had a difficult labor and could only save one. Should they save the adult or the child? Save the adult or the child? Was there need to ask? Fan Xian had always thought this was the stupidest question. It was absolutely stupidest to the extreme. Fan Xian was not an idiot. But old bald donkey. Fan Xian stared coldly at the stone floor in front of him. The evil fire in his eyes burned brightly. Sinisterly, he said, "You big idiot." Deng Ziyu paused. He didn't understand the word idiot, but it was clear that the commissioner was already angry to the point of exploding. He quickly comforted, "Sir, don't be angry, don't be angry." Fan Xian opened his mouth and cursed loudly. SS. He slammed his palm down and directly smashed the table beside him into pieces. He cursed sinisterly. That goddamn old bald donkey. What exactly are his intentions? Regardless of whether or not Sir Fei's medicine had side effects, it was truly and greatly beneficial to Warner's body. After Warner stopped taking the medicine, her body clearly weakened. Who knew what would happen in the future? Warner stopped taking the medicine because Kuhi had pointed out this matter. But why would Kuhi do this? Fan Xian did not think that Kuhi was a person who purely bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. Whether or not his wife could have a child, he believed that he would not be so attentive. Thinking of how Wanner almost had a relapse of her old illness because of Kuhi's words, Fan Xian's fingers began to tremble. He became angry and found it difficult to suppress the urge to kill. He stood up. His eyes burned with a sinister fire. Staring at Deng Ziyu, he said, "Send an order to Su Wenmao and Xia Qifei. This year, all goods going north, lower their grade by 1." Deng Ziyu made a sound, thinking what exactly had happened. Both sides of the trade with northern Qi had been very happy. Suddenly making a scene like this seemed to hurt the overall situation. He couldn't resist trying to persuade. "Sir, although I don't know what happened, lowering a grade is the same as northern Qi losing hundreds of thousands of liang of silver. This is too big of a matter." Fan Xian knew that Deng Ziyu was urging him not to harm the public discussion because of a personal grudge. He smiled coldly and said, "I am a person who returns grievances with grievances. Others want to make my family unhappy, so I will make their country unhappy. Hundreds of thousands of liang of silver in exchange for my wife's coughing for a dozen days is already letting them off easy." Deng Ziyu heard the coldness in Fan Xian's tone and didn't dare to say anything more. Carefully, he asked, "What exactly happened?" Fan Xian did not reply. "Sir, the bald donkey you speak of, what donkey is it?" Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "It's Northern Qi's Ku He, that hairless donkey." Deng Ziyu was silent. He was shocked, but didn't dare say anything. He thought to himself that the commissioner dared to curse Sigu Jian out in the street. Perhaps it wasn't Sigu Jian. At this time, calling Ku He an old donkey in his own home didn't seem to be a big deal. Fan Xian continued coldly and said, "Send a letter to Wang Qinian. Tell him to prepare to release the news." "Yes." Deng Ziyu accepted the order and asked, "What specifications? When?" "Specifications?" Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. "Within 3 days, let everyone in Northern Qi know a story. Also, let them believe this story. As for when, listen to my instructions." "Yes." If it wasn't for the fact that Ruo was currently studying under Ku He, Fan Xian wished he could spread the news of Ku He eating human flesh today. Although he knew that this kind of rumor would not harm Ku He's majestic reputation and would not bring him any real benefits. In other words, now was not the best time to spread the news. However, Fan Xian couldn't help it. Now that he couldn't kill Ku He had to do something to get revenge. Many times, Fan Xian appeared to be a calm and sinister person, but when it came to the people he cared about the most, he would become angry like a lion. Even though he knew he wouldn't get much and would suffer a loss, he still had to roar and protect his territory. Regardless of what Ku He thought, one had indeed stopped taking medicine because of his words, so Fan Xian had to make Northern Qi and Ku He suffer a loss. Perhaps it was a bit childish, but Fan Xian could still be called a person, probably because of this childishness. Tomorrow morning, I'll take a boat back to my hometown. I'm officially taking a leave of 10 days. I'll be back around the 9th day of the Lunar New Year. If I can write in my hometown, I'll write some. If I can't, I'll seriously entertain myself and celebrate the new year. Here, I wish my dear brothers and sisters a happy new year. I have to go and pack my luggage now. Well, there's still one more chapter left in the 5th volume. After I finish the next chapter, I'll write a summary at the end of the volume. I'll also write a summary of 2007. I'll recall my life last year and the days I read and wrote with everyone. I'll also wish everyone a happy new year, good health, and a happy family. Oh, right. If everyone is afraid of not having a book to read, I'll introduce everyone to Jing Guan's new book, Unparalleled Food and Lust. This is something I really, really like. Of course, Jing Guan's book doesn't need me to advertise it, but I know some friends might have been scared away by the first 3 chapters and the introduction. This book is written very comfortably. Personally, I think it's much better than The Beast's Blood. At least, the opening chapter is much better. I can't give a detailed evaluation. I can only say that Jing Guan is very talented. Of course, I don't know him, so this is not an advertisement. I just want to share something good with everyone. To be continued, if you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 410. It was a very fulfilling and tiring New Year's Day. I'm going to catch up on my sleep later. I'll start work tomorrow. I'll report the details of the sublimation to everyone the next day. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 411. The big tree in the Shazhou side manor was unlucky. Fan Xian had used the emperor's sword to unleash his kingly aura and shaved off countless tree bark. The reason for this was all because the young imperial envoy's anger was not shallow. He could not put on a sour face in front of his wife, nor could he immediately rush to Shangjing in northern Qi to scold his own sister's teacher. Thus, he had to find a way to vent his anger. Fan Xian was not a boring boss who liked to beat and scold his subordinates to relieve stress. It just so happened that, in his previous life, he had been lying in bed reading a book. He had once read a sour story that made him cry. Thus, in this life, he learned from the male lead of that story. The male lead, who liked to pour water that he washed his feet, had been bullied by his wife and endured it for many years. He would always sneak out in the middle of the night and smash trees by the river to find a pitiful psychological balance. Fan Xian didn't smash trees. He used the Grand Sigu sword to slice at trees. As he sliced, he gritted his teeth hatefully. When the trees in the courtyard had their hair all white overnight and their clothes torn to shreds, revealing their lowly and naked bodies, Fan Xian and his group left in the carriage and returned to the Peng Manor by West Lake. There were many people waiting for the imperial envoy and the princess by West Lake. It was not convenient for the two governors in Suzhou to come personally, but the Hangzhou Zhizhou that Fan Xian secretly admired would not be polite. He sealed off a third of the long embankment by West Lake to make it easier for the Fan Manor's carriages to enter. He also let a group of subordinates to wait around, afraid that these two important figures would be dissatisfied. As for this flattery, Fan Xian comfortably accepted it. After all, Wanner's health was not good, and she did need peace and quiet. After everyone met up in the manor, Cece and the wives of the Tung family served Wanner to rest. Fan Xian found some time to see the Hangzhou Zhizhou and said a few warm words of encouragement. The next day, he had Tiger Gargao to block all of the wives of these officials outside the back garden. The mistress of the Fan family did not see guests. Wanner gazed at Fan Xian pitifully. Her brows had long furrowed into a weak willow leaf in the wind. Her eyes were crying and complaining. "Good husband, just spare me." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Be good, just drink the medicine. Otherwise, I'll spank you." Wanner had no choice but to drink the medicine bitterly. She couldn't help but sigh deep in her heart. She wondered why she was so stupid. She told Fan Xian the reason. Given his personality, he would not allow her to do this. If she had known earlier, she would not have come to Jiangnan. She would have just secretly stopped the medicine in Jingdou. Suddenly, she shyly thought that if she didn't go to Jiangnan, even if she stopped taking the medicine and got rid of the foreign element in her body, but without him, how could she have a child? Fan Xian was wiping away the medicine at the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief when he suddenly saw his wife's blushing face. He was startled, not knowing what she was thinking. "Wife," he teased, "why are you so shy?" Wanner rolled her eyes at him and said, "I'm not telling you." She quickly changed the topic. Coming to Jiangnan this time, for one, was a matter that had been decided before the new year. Another was an important matter that needed to be discussed with Fan Xian. For these matters, she could not trust the servants to pass on the message. Fan Xian saw that she was serious and furrowed his brows slightly. Putting his ear close, he listened to his wife speak quietly by his ear. His mood grew heavier and heavier, but his face did not change. It remained calm. He comforted and said, "I thought it was something big for you to come down to Jiangnan in such a hurry. The elders in the palace are used to gossiping about people and don't care too much." During their days in Jingdou, this young couple had a good understanding. Furthermore, they had once made it clear that Wanner was now someone's wife and daughter. In such a complicated relationship, Fan Xian pitied her and did not want her to be too involved in these dark matters, even if Wanner could actually help him a lot. For example, on the day the Great Prince visited Fan Manor, the two of them spoke in the middle of the night. Although she said this, Wanner could not pretend that nothing had happened around her. Furthermore, she could not blindfold her eyes and pretend that she did not see her husband and her mother, who she was not very close to, at daggers drawn. A girl's thoughts were difficult to guess. In this matter, she always wanted to find a way to protect Fan Xian and not let both sides sink into an irreparable situation. However, it was very difficult. It was difficult for Fan Xian to understand, and it was the same for Wanner. Thus, she could only stay in Jingdo and carefully ask around for news from the Fourth Bureau. She helped Fan Xian analyze the mysteries of those women's politics. Using her aloof status and the privilege of entering and leaving the palace as she pleased, she helped Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, contact the people in the palace and eliminate any resistance that could be eliminated. Fan Xian knew about these things and knew that he could not stop her, so he could only let her be. Furthermore, there were times when he needed Wanner to act as a lubricant in the middle, just like the trip to the palace after the spring examination. Because of Fan Xian's opposition, Wanner's abilities were not fully displayed. Her natural sense of politics and palace matters was suppressed. However, this did not mean that she did not understand these things. Thus, after she learned of the story in the palace, she resolutely came to Jiangnan. Different from what everyone thought, the young mistress of the Fan Manor did not come to Jiangnan to see the northern Qi Saint girl called Duo. She just wanted to remind Fan Xian of certain things in person. The elders in the palace can influence a lot. Wanner looked at Fan Xian worriedly and said in a quiet voice, "The Empress Dowager is the Empress Aunt. The relationship between these two cannot be separated. The Empress has arranged for someone to enter the palace to tell the Empress Dowager the story of the stone. There are dangers hidden within. You cannot be too careless." Fan Xian fell silent. A glimmer of anger welled up in his heart. When he was copying Story of the Stone in Danzhou, it was only to find some games for himself and Cici and for Ro to entertain. At the same time, it was to satisfy his literary thoughts. He did not think too much of it. Although he knew that old Chao's writings at the time were somewhat taboo, he thought that this was a completely different country in two different worlds. How could it be taboo? So he had been careless. No one had thought that their life and their encounters would later change so much. Every word and sentence in Dream of the Red Chamber seemed to express their dissatisfaction and hidden bitterness. Particularly that poem about Sister Chiao. Anyone could write this book, but it could not be him. Yet, in the present world, everyone believed that he had written this book. The resentment in the book seemed to be narrating his dissatisfaction with the matter of the old Yi family. The Empress had arranged for someone to enter the palace to tell the old Empress Dowager the story. Given the Empress Dowager's sensitive and suspicious mind, would she not think that he had ulterior motives? The matters of the royal family were all about the heart. If the heart was suspicious, then the person was suspicious. If the heart could be punished, then the person could be punished. Fan Xian thought quietly for a while and found that this was indeed a problem he was about to face. If the Empress Dowager truly thought that he had dissatisfaction in his heart and wanted to redress the matter of the past, then perhaps the old woman's temporary silence would no longer exist. Presently, the Qing kingdom was governed by filial piety. Whatever the Empress Dowager said, his emperor would have to express it. However, this was not a big problem. Fan Xian had been in Jiangnan for a long time, and his strength had reached a certain level. These small waves would not make him very afraid. He gently patted his wife's hand and warmly said, "Don't worry, even if that old woman suspects me. So what? I haven't done anything. She can't just ask the emperor to strip me of my position." Wanna laughed bitterly and couldn't resist shaking her head. Using her finger, she gently poked at the spot between his brows and said, "That is my grandmother, and also your grandmother. Why are you calling her old woman?" Fan Xian chuckled and said, "Speaking of which, when I saw you in the Qing temple, I would never have guessed that you would be my cousin. Umph. I don't know who hid it from me for so long, Lin Wanner muttered with a pout. Without waiting for Fan Xian to comfort her, Wanner continued with a serious expression. Even if there is no harm in this matter for now, what about the matter of the Ming family? The storm of your lawsuit in Jiang and has long spread into Jingdou. Presently, Song Shuren can be considered to have truly made a name for himself. To say that the eldest legitimate son does not have a natural right to inheritance, this touches the bottom line of many people. Although Song Shuren is helping Xia Qifei fight the lawsuit, everyone in Jingdou knows that you are their true backer. They can't help but ask in their hearts, just what is our Sir Fan Jr. thinking? Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and said, "What can I think?" Lin Wanner gazed at him and said, "As for looking at it on the surface, you want to help Xia Qifei take back the Ming family property would the Empress Dowager not suspect you? Furthermore, there's also the disadvantage of the story of the stone earlier. Combining the two, everyone will think that you want to take back the palace treasury. But who does the palace treasury belong to? Who is the eldest legitimate son in the palace?" Lin Wanner sighed. "The things you did in Jiangnan, you truly placed yourself on the opposite side of the crown prince and even the Empress Dowager." Fan Xian was silent for a moment and then decided to speak his true thoughts. "Correct. But in reality, I purposely created this kind of atmosphere to make the people in the palace feel that I have ulterior motives." Lin Wanner opened her mouth slightly in surprise. She felt that such a rash advance did not seem to be in his character. "You came a few days late, so you don't know that the emperor has sent a eunuch to announce the edict." Fan Xian smiled slightly. "In a few days, the capital will know my attitude. I'm standing on the third prince's side." Lin Wanner was confused and nervous. In a quiet voice, she said, "You are prepared to let the third prince fight in the arena, but he is still a child. This child is not simple." Fan Xian lowered his head slightly and smiled gently. "His ability is not bad. Furthermore, I have great confidence in my ability to read people. I also have confidence in my ability as a teacher. The person I teach will not be too bad. But you still haven't explained why you created this kind of atmosphere today." Lin Wanner furrowed her brows. If she allowed this situation to continue, the two sides would gradually lose any chance of reconciliation. It would also force. She abruptly raised her head and looked at Fan Xian in shock. Slightly startled, she said, "You are prepared to force them to act?" The bedroom was silent for a long time. Fan Xian slowly nodded his head. In a quiet voice, he said, "Many people have overlooked the Empress and the Crown Prince. However, then I both know that only one side can survive between us. Taking advantage of the fact that the Emperor still cares about me, I am going to force the hidden disaster to erupt earlier." Lin Wanner's expression gradually became one of helplessness. Her face darkened. Although she knew that the Son of Heaven's battle did not leave the slightest bit of affection, when she thought of her dearest husband or her brother, the Crown Prince, one of them had to die, she couldn't help but feel a trace of cold. Fan Xian's eyes were even colder than his wife's heart. Slowly and indifferently, he said, "I don't want to kill people. However, they've already killed people decades ago. Now, they will not let me go. Since it is so, I will finish this matter." Lin Wanner was silent for a long time. She then opened her mouth and said, "Then what about her?" The her in these words was the biggest problem between Fan Xian and his wife, the eldest princess who had never been willing to settle down. Fan Xian's eyelids drooped slightly. Gently, he pulled Wanner into his arms. Gently, he said, "The Emperor's thoughts run too deep. I won't pay attention to them. Your mother's thoughts are also too big. It is not my place to pay attention to them. This is a battle between her and the Emperor. I only need to be on the side. I can't promise anything else, but I can promise you that I will not personally do anything to her." Was this promise trustworthy? Uncle Emperor has always doted on me. Lin Wanner was like a wounded kitten in Fan Xian's arms. She spoke weakly, but her eyes gradually became misty. If the eldest princess truly had the courage to do such a thing, then even if, with Fan Xian's power and identity, Lin Wanner would not be implicated in any way, her identity in the royal family would become awkward and dangerous. Fan Xian was silent. He knew that Wan'er's sigh was true. After they were married and walking in the palace, only then did he clearly feel that his emperor truly doted on Wan'er. Wan'er's status in the palace was indeed much higher than that of a normal princess. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. The emperor marrying his favorite niece to his illegitimate son could be considered compensation to him? It's fine. It's all the elders' business, he said with a slight smile. Let them make a ruckus. Although his words were light, the content was not. In the next year, if the Qing court did not change masters, there would be a bloodbath in the royal family. What would happen to Fan Xian and Wan'er, the young man and woman? If it was the former, Fan Xian believed that his entire family would be buried with the emperor. If it was the latter, how would Wan'er face it? In this instant, Fan Xian suddenly felt that forcing the other party to act ahead of time seemed to be a very boring thing. However, in order to protect himself and the people around him, he had to do this. The old cripple should also be thinking this way, right? I hope he has some good ideas. Fan Xian gently patted Wan'er's back and looked at the calm lake outside the window, the green mountain, the fishing boat, and the willow branch. His thoughts floated to the distant Jingdou. In the chilly royal palace in Jingdou, the serving girls and eunuchs walked quietly. Occasionally, some of the younger serving girls would giggle and immediately be harshly scolded by the old nannies. Spring had ended, and the beginning of summer had arrived. The trees in the palace were luxuriant, but the people in the palace still did not have a sliver of freedom. Guangxin Palace had once been the eldest princess's palace. After the matter of the eldest princess secretly communicating with Northern Qi and betraying a high-ranking Overwatch Council official had been exposed by Uncle Wu Zhu through the city, the most beautiful woman in Qing Kingdom had sadly withdrawn from the political scene in Jingdou and gone to the cold and cheerless Li Palace. Although she could faintly influence the situation in the palace from Xinyangli Palace, it was not as convenient as being inside Jingdou. Thus, in the 6th year of the Qing calendar, she finally convinced the Empress Dowager to move back to Jingdou. At this time, the sensational incident of the Juanshan Conference had long disappeared from people's memories. However, not long after returning to Jingdou, the power of the Juanshan Conference in Jiangnan was revealed angrily in front of her brother the emperor. Thus, the emperor ordered her to once again move into the royal palace. It was called a reunion, but in reality, it was to keep a close watch. However, the eldest princess had, after all, operated in the palace for a long time. She was also the Empress Dowager's favorite girl, and her relationship with the empress had always been close. Thus, no one could stop her from entering and leaving the royal palace. The trick she had done in secret had also successfully fooled many people. Of course, in order to reassure her brother, it was not convenient for her to leave the palace too often. She had been in close contact with her subordinates, so her most frequent activity was to chat with the Empress Dowager in the palace and study some flowers, birds, insects, and water with the empress. What she embroidered was probably not cloth. The situation in Jiangnan had already been settled. Regardless of whether or not eldest princess Li Yunrui accepted it, whether or not she admitted it, whether or not she was sad, the Jiangnan she had managed for over a decade had already been completely taken over by her successful son-in-law. The old Ming matriarch had died. Great Master Sanshi had died. The Ming family was as silent as a cicada in winter. Under the combined suppression of Fan Xian and Xue Qing, the Jiangnan officialdom did not have much of a backlash. The trusted aide she had placed in the 3 large workshops of the Palace Treasury Transport Company had all been pulled out by Fan Xian. Although those officials were still respectful in their letters, under Fan Xian's tyrannical power, they could not move. The anger of the people, which had been created with great difficulty, had, for some reason, quietly dissipated. Thus, the letters of blood from tens of thousands of people that had been sent to Jingdou from thousands of li away and the old scholar who had brought the case before the emperor had become rootless trees. They were not a threat to the court at all. Forfeit salary? The eldest princess Li Yunrui narrowed her eyes. A trace of ridicule flashed through her beautiful phoenix eyes. Tell me, do you think the Fan family lacks this little bit of silver? Sitting beside her was the dignified and luxurious-looking Empress. The Empress smiled slightly and said, "The Emperor dotes on the Fan family. A few days ago, the investigation of the Ministry of Revenue was also hastily concluded." The eldest princess smiled slightly. Her long eyelashes fluttered with a tenderness that did not match her age. She smiled lightly and said, "Minister Fan has done a great service to the country. How can we women compare?" She sighed and said, "When all is said and done, I don't actually have a child. Having a daughter is not that close, so why should I care about these things? I think that when autumn comes, I should ask my mother to go back to Xinjiang to live." The Empress's heart thumped. She silently cursed this foxy woman for pretending to be young. She could also hear that the other party was retreating in order to advance. However, in the present situation, if the Yunrui really did not do it, then she and the Crown Prince would not be able to stop Fan Xian and the third prince's momentum. Of course, the Empress was not an idiot. She knew that the eldest princess would not give up the power in her hands and leave. The other party had said these words to gain the upper hand in the situation. There was even a glimmer of caution in the Empress's smile that should not have been there. "Were you saying, sister? Although I am a stupid woman who does not know the affairs of the country, I know that you are a pillar of the country and have obtained countless benefits for the Qin court. If you truly go to Xinjiang, the emperor will be the first to not agree." The conversation between these two women still could not leave that chair. However, no one dared to speak too bluntly of such a matter before it started. The eldest princess was silent for a moment and slowly opened her mouth to say, "Mother is old and is always easily deceived by others." The Empress nodded and smiled slightly. "Let's take it slowly." The two of them were silent and raised their teacups to sip. The Empress suddenly asked probingly, "I heard Fan Xian is doing well in Jiangnan. Is it that an ace suddenly came and cut down half a building in Suzhou?" The matter of cutting down half a building with one strike could not be hidden for long. It still traveled back to Jingdo and into the palace. The eldest princess knew what the Empress wanted to ask, but she purposely did not give her the truth. With a trace of pride, she smiled and said, "I do not know much about the matters of the Jianghu. If a great grandmaster stood behind the eldest princess, then the Empress would have a clearer understanding of where she should stand in their cooperation. Of course, this would also greatly strengthen the Empress and the Crown Prince's resolve." Seeing that the eldest princess was not willing to speak clearly, the Empress cursed in her heart and took her leave. Looking at the mother of the country's slightly lonely figure, a glimmer of pity and disdain flashed through the eldest princess's eyes. She wondered where this kind of character got her confidence from to want a piece of the pie. The chief strategist of Xinjiang, Huang Yi, and Yuan Hongdao could not enter the palace, so the trusted aide at the eldest princess's side was a eunuch. The eunuch stood to the side and quietly said the question in the eldest princess's heart. "Does the Empress not know this is asking a tiger for its skin?" The eldest princess said the words that it was inconvenient for a trusted aide to say. She smiled coldly and said, "Even if I am a tiger, she can only stand on my side. Otherwise, if the third prince truly ascends and Fan Xian wants to avenge Yi Qingmei, who will help her block it?" She slowly closed her eyes and said, "She and I have temporarily put aside the question of whether it is Changqian or the second prince, because she knows that if the matter succeeds, she will not be able to win against me. She only wants a way out." The Jiangnan side? Don't worry about it anymore. The eldest princess sighed. That son-in-law of mine had already made preparations before he went to Jiangnan. How could those natives in Jiangnan be a match for him? She shook her head and faintly said after a moment of silence, "Now that I think about it, I really did make a big mistake back then. If it wasn't for the Nolan Street incident, how could Fan Xian and I have become like this? If he stood by my side, who in this world could oppose us?" Not waiting for the eunuch to reply, she laughed self-mockingly. What a fantasy! If Fan Xian and I did not have such an unsolvable hatred, how could my emperor brother dare to put him in such an important position? The eunuch listened to the side and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. From the beginning, I was wrong. A glimmer of coldness and decisiveness flashed through the eldest princess's beautiful face. No matter how powerful Fan Xian is, he will still be held by the palace's strings by his limbs. Why should I care about this puppet? What I should care about is the person holding the strings. In Hongguang Palace, not far from Guangxin Palace, the Empress Dowager was half-lidded. After all, she was old. Her spirit was not as good as it had been in the past, and the decisiveness to kill in her heart was also not as good as it had been. Stop, stop. The old woman stopped the storytelling serving girl in the palace with disgust. She glanced at the book in the serving girl's hand and didn't speak for a moment. It's all preposterous words. I don't know why so many people in the marketplace like to read it, an old nanny at the side said in a fawning voice. The Empress Dowager shook her head. A moment later, she quietly said, "Children, it is normal to be a bit dissatisfied." The old nanny didn't say anything more. A complicated emotion flashed through the Empress Dowager's eyes. How could she not know why the Empress wanted her to read the story of the stone? Although she was indeed angry at Fan Xian's resentment, she was even angrier at the Empress's actions. No matter how wrong Fan Xian's mother was, Fan Xian was, after all, a descendant of the royal family. This was what the Empress Dowager valued the most. How long has Chun'er been gone? The Empress Dowager suddenly thought of her favorite granddaughter and asked the person beside her. The princess should already be in Hangzhou by now. I've also been to Jiangnan. The scenery there is not bad. It's just that those women are too presumptuous. The Empress Dowager furrowed her brows and ordered, "No matter how much effort the Fan family put into preparing, it cannot compare to the things in the palace. Have someone prepare some things to send to Jiangnan." The old woman thought for a bit and then said, "Go ask Chun'er if she is used to living by Westlake. If she doesn't like it, have her move to the temporary imperial residence on the mountain." The old nanny quickly made a sound of acknowledgement. Inside the royal study, the Qing emperor, who had just finished the imperial conference, rubbed tiredly between his brows and took a sip of warm ginseng tea. Looking at the scenery outside the window that never seemed to change, he furrowed his brows in disgust. "Hongzhou," the emperor unconsciously called out. Only after calling out did he remember that Hongzhou had already been moved to the Eastern Palace by him for half a year. He couldn't help but smile self-mockingly. "Your Majesty, what orders do you have?" the head eunuch beside him asked respectfully. The emperor shook his head and gently coughed a few times. The echo echoed through the royal study. He couldn't help but be startled. He thought that perhaps he really was getting old. Hearing the echo of his cough, he realized that he was very lonely. "Go to the little building and have a look." He brushed his dragon robe, straightened his chest, and walked toward the door. The eunuch behind him quickly followed. They were only in time to hear the emperor faintly sigh. "When do you have time to go to Danzhou and have a look?" This year, the Qing kingdom was no different than any other year. The palace was still lonely and dirty. Outside the palace was still bustling. The court was still arguing. The 6 ministries were still fighting. The Overwatch Council was still silent and ferocious. Old Director Chen was still enjoying the singing and dancing in Qin Garden. Minister Fan was still busy in the Ministry of Revenue. The common people were struggling to survive. Apart from surviving, they found some happy things to comfort their almost numb hearts. For example, the East family had married a girl, the West family had lost an old man, the South had not had a flood this year, and there seemed to be a war in the West. Sir Fan Jr. had not written poems. Had the Northern Qi Saint girl and the young mistress of the Fan family met? All the way down from Jingdou to Jizhou, where it was about to merge into the Great River, there was a bustling scene on both sides of the riverbanks. The people repairing the riverbanks laboriously moved sand and stone like ants. This year, the Qing kingdom had been lucky. The spring floods were much smaller than expected. The abundance of the national treasury also gave the river transport governor's yamen a lot of confidence. Although it was heavily deducted, in the end, they still gave out a lot of wages. Thus, the motivation of the people to work was much stronger. Yang Wanli's face was dark. He wore coarse clothing and stood with his brows tightly furrowed in the bamboo shed. Although the present situation was good, the autumn floods were the most terrifying thing. Furthermore, he had the heavy responsibility of supervising the movement of the silver that was secretly shipped over. Thus, the mental pressure was incomparably great. As for repairing the dikes and dividing the water, although he did not understand these things, he still put down his pride and personally carried them out. The continuous exposure to the sun finally washed away the last trace of scholarly aura from this Fan family student, turning him into a true official. On the riverbanks, a number of people came from afar. It looked like they were officials heading to a foreign place. From a distance, the group of people began to call toward the inside of the bamboo shed. Yang Wanli pulled up his lapel and wiped the sweat from his face. He gazed in that direction with confusion. Finally, he saw clearly who the people were and couldn't help but walk out of the shed with joy. "Brother Jichong? Brother Jolin? Why are you here?" Yang Wanli went forward emotionally and grasped the people's hands. The people who had come were Ho Jichong and Cheng Jolin of Fan Xian's four disciples. After the spring examinations, these two had been sent out to work in other counties. Because of Fan Xian's care and their own hard work, they had advanced quickly. In just over a year, they had completed a few jumps and crossed the first big hurdle of the 7th level. However, the places where these two people were officials were far from Jizhou. So, while Yang Wanli was pleasantly surprised, he also couldn't help feeling a bit surprised. Ho Jichong did not have time to reply to his words. He only held those calloused hands and gazed at Yang Wanli's dark face. Moved, he said, "Sir's letter only said that you had arrived at the river transport governor's yamen. I didn't think it would be so difficult." To the side, Cheng Jolin had already begun to sigh. Yang Wanli chuckled and thought of something. With a serious expression, he said, "Usually, Wanli only talks about political matters. It was not until I came into contact with the matters of the people's lives that I realized how difficult it is for the people of the Qin kingdom." Teacher had Wanli come to repair the river because of his trust and cultivation. Only after experiencing this personally do I know that under Teacher's seemingly unconcerned appearance, there's a heart that worries for the country and the people. The three of them fell silent. It was Ho Jichong who broke the silence and slowly said, "According to rumors, the reason you were able to subdue that Northern Qi Saint girl was all because of the words you said in the Northern Qi royal palace." Speaking of Northern Qi Saint girl Haitang, even though these three were all Fan Xian students, they still couldn't help but laugh up their sleeves. Yang Wanli suppressed a smile and asked, "What words?" Ho Jichong turned around and looked at the laborers on the embankment at his feet and the roaring river not far away. With a sigh, he said, "First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joys of the world. I was thinking, back then, we seem to have underestimated, sir. First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joys of the world." The three of them chewed on these words in their hearts. A sense of respect rose involuntarily. Teacher, although he looks tired, he actually has a pure heart. Yang Wanli thought of everything he had seen and heard these few months, the importance Fan Xian placed on the river transport, and the changes that had happened to Jiangnan because of Fan Xian's arrival. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Beside the bamboo shed on the embankment were other officials of the river transport yamen. Ho Jichong noticed that Yang Wanli kept using the word teacher and couldn't resist coughing a few times in a low voice to remind him. In front of outsiders, it's best to call him sir, otherwise the court will say we have formed a clique. A gentleman has friends, but not cliques. If we really want to form a clique, I am willing to be teacher's lackey. Yang Wanli smiled slightly and said with a calmness that was different from his in the past, "Everyone under heaven knows that we are the four disciples of Fan Xian. As long as we are working for the benefit of the people under heaven, why should we care about other people's words?" Ho Jichong was slightly startled. Then he laughed loudly and said, "That's true. I'm still a bit intentional. It looks like Wanli has indeed improved a lot in this half year. Following at teacher's side is indeed beneficial for cultivating one's character." Chung Jialin also said enviously, "We are officials outside while you are in Jiangnan." Who knew that teacher would go to Jiangnan? Yang Wanli smiled and said, "I haven't been with teacher for many days, but that kid sure Changli. If you go to Suzhou to see, you will know how much teacher has changed him." Speaking of this, only now did Yang Wanli remember to ask, "Where are you going?" Chung Jialin smiled slightly and replied, "During this half year, teacher has been reorganizing the government in Jiangnan, and there have been a number of vacancies, so the Ministry of Appointments is transferring me to Suzhou." Yang Wanli nodded happily. He knew that Chung Jialin going to Suzhou would certainly be of help to Fan Xian. "What about you?" Ho Jichong smiled and said, "I'm going to Jiaozhou to be a Dianli." Yang Wanli was startled. He thought that this kind of transfer was equivalent to being demoted. He didn't understand why Fan Xian would make such an arrangement. Ho Jichong did not explain anything. He only knew that Sir Fan Jr. had his reasons for wanting him to go to Jiaozhou. Furthermore, according to what the teacher had said in his letter, of the four of them, only he could manage to do such a sinister funeral. Worry about the world first? In the Jiangnan water village, Fan Xian lay on a bamboo chair on a large boat. Looking at the sky full of stars, he couldn't resist sighing and saying, "I came to this world to enjoy happiness, not to worry about the country and its people." On such a night, the large boat sailed along the river. It had long left Hangzhou. After spending a month by the West Lake, Fan Xian had carefully studied the medicine Fei Jie had left behind. He discovered with some annoyance that what Ku he had said was probably true. However, Fei Jie seemed to feel remorseful and didn't say a word about Fan Xian's invitation. He didn't know where that old pervert was hiding. However, Wanner persisted in drinking the medicine, so his body gradually recovered. Fan Xian's mood was much better. His hatred toward Northern Shiku he had also decreased. As for the matter of having a child, he was not in a hurry. He wasn't even 20, so what was there to be anxious about? After all the matters in Jiangnan had been settled, he brought everyone around him onto the large boat the Navy provided and began to travel along the Jiangnan waterways. Their destinations were, without a doubt, Wuzhou, Jiaozhou, and Danzhou. At this time, it was late at night. Wanner, the third prince, and the others had long fallen asleep. There was only Fan Xian and Lin Debao lying side by side on the quiet plank. Even the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau and the Tiger Guards, who were usually hidden in the dark, had been called down by Fan Xian. Fan Xian couldn't sleep. Debao had slept too much during the day on the boat, so he could endure a little. The two of them lay side by side and ate the delicious pastries of Jiangnan as they talked randomly. The world had never understood why Fan Xian had such a good relationship with that idiotic brother-in-law. In reality, even Fan Xian himself could not explain it. Perhaps it was because when talking to Debao, he could obtain an unprecedented ease. He didn't need to think about anything and didn't need to be afraid of anything. Furthermore, he didn't need to talk about politics, the world, right and wrong, black and white, good and evil, the death of others or his own death, the white jade square or the smelly gutter. He only needed to talk about simple and pleasant things like eating. For example, the stars that dotted the night sky above the ship. The river wind blew gently, and the water rippled without stirring. The ship was anchored in the middle of a nameless lake. The reeds around it were far away, and there were no water birds chirping at night. It was quiet. The starry sky above them was lonely and distant. Fan Xian looked at the starry sky above him and said to the bow beside him, "What do you think the stars in the sky are?" It was sesame. Debao gestured with his wide and plump palm. "The moon is a sesame cake. The stars are sesame." Little Bao said it before. Xiao Bao was the second young master of the Lin family who had died at Uncle Wu Zhu's hands. Fan Xian's heart jumped. Shortly after, he smiled slightly and pointed at the stars and the crescent moon in the sky. "I don't know if it's Xiaobing or not. I only know that the Qing Kingdom's starry sky also has a moon and those stars. Furthermore, strangely, there's also a sun during the day. It was not strange for the sun to appear in the day and the moon and stars to appear in the night. This was common sense that even children understood. But Dabao nodded his head very seriously and said, Little Xian Xian, I also think it's very strange. Fan Xian sighed and said, Yes, it is too strange. When I was young, I discovered that this place is still Earth. Volume 5, End of Jiangnan in Jinghua. Note: writing the end summary tomorrow, it's really tiring. I wish everyone a happy new year, even though it's a bit late. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.